these things. We need to talk about these things.
Let me know when you're ready.
All right, I would like to welcome everybody out to the Community Development and Renewal Agency of Harriman City special meeting, which we will start before we actually start our general meeting. We will start with a motion for the review and outline the finalization process to approve the minutes of September 8th, 2021.
I'll make a motion to have the minutes of September 8th, 2021 be prepared and distributed to each member of the Redevelopment Agency Board. The board will have 10 days to review the minutes and submit any changes to the secretary. If after 10 days there are no changes, the minutes will stand approved. If there are changes, the process will be followed until all changes are made and the board is in agreement.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Jared?
Yes.
Clint?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
That motion, I'll vote yes, that motion passes. Item 2.1, resolution approving an interlocal agreement between the Community Development and Renewal Agency of Harriman and Salt Lake County and the Harriman Innovation District Community Resident Reinvestment Project Area. Chase.
Thank you. So this is just a brief item. It comes already approved by the county. It is a property tax incentive for the Innovation District, which is the Bullfrog area. The county has contributed 100% of their property tax for the area over a 15-year period in an amount of $437,901. So at this point, the board's options are to approve the interlocal and sign that and thereby receive that property tax incentive over that 15-year term, or to not sign it and not receive the money.
Any further discussion? I'll accept a motion.
Motion to approve resolution number R 2021-03, approving the interlocal agreement between Salt Lake County and the Community Development and Renewal Agency, setting forth the county's participation in the Harriman Innovation District Community Reinvestment Project Area.
I will second.
I have a motion and a second by Clint.
I'll take it.
All right. Motion and a second. Steve?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Clint?
Yes.
Jared?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes, that motion passes. Item 2.2, discussion of a participation agreement benefiting one or more end users of the proposed auto mall. Chase?
Thank you again. John, you got the clicker. Thank you. So this is a proposed participation agreement for the auto mall area. Just by way of background, the city has already executed an interlocal with the CDRA board, committing to 70% of the sales tax generated from the auto mall area to be distributed to the CDRA as a sales tax incentive to be used within the project area. At this time, there is no property tax increment approved by any of the taxing entities that collect taxes from this area. So the discussion tonight is just for a sales tax incentive. The term on the interlocal agreement is for a period of 15 years. That is triggered once the participation agreement is triggered, meaning that the interlocal agreement has a 15-year term that has not yet started. That starts whenever and if the CDRA board approves a participation agreement for one or more end users. One of the things that I would like to tee up for a discussion tonight would be an incentive cap. There is currently no incentive cap included in the interlocal or the participation agreement. The only reference to a cap of the incentive within the interlocal states that the maximum that the city will contribute of that 70% will be whatever the participation agreement identifies as being the maximum amount contributed to an end user. So a couple of things you could do there. You could go back and renegotiate a cap with the city council, which is you, and change that within the interlocal agreement, or just capture that on the participation agreement end, because the language in the interlocal already anticipates that there will be an incentive cap. It just has not called out what that incentive cap is. And so that's where I'd like to turn to, is just identifying and discussing what a proper incentive cap might be within the participation agreement, if that's the route that the board would like to go. Again, there is no cap on the incentive within the interlocal agreement. It just states that whatever the amount is that the board agrees to commit to the end user, in this instance, we have Harriman 73 Partners as the current end user, that would be the incentive cap over the 15-year term. We do have some data that we can look at to identify and maybe help us hone in on what a number might be. In 2017, GSBS performed a study for us on new car buying power within the Southwest Salt Lake County. And they identified that the future buying power of Utah households was $4,060. So that's not how much money is actually spent on new cars, that's the power of each household to spend on new cars, or cars in general, car sales within the area per household. So this table identifies, if you look at the top number, households in 2016 within a 1 mile radius of the auto mall, there are 6,665 households. You times that by the spending power, and you have current car sale power spending within that area of $27 million. That expands out to a 3 mile and a 5 mile radius, as well as the entire area. The study identified the entire area as Salt Lake County, Saratoga Springs, Bluffdale, and Lehigh. So again, just $1.8 billion of car buying power within that entire area. The projections for 2040 obviously has the household numbers going up within the 1 mile, 3 mile, 5 mile radius, as well as the entire area, and those numbers are depicted there as well. We also had a project area budget conducted by Zion's Public Finance. This is a requirement of a CDRA area by state law. So the budget looked at some other identifying factors. They look at property tax projections as well as sales tax projections within the area. Again, this isn't a project, or this isn't a property tax incentive, but I think it is helpful just for some context to look at what the property tax might be generated from this area in light of the sales tax as well. So the first paragraph, I won't read it word for word, but it projects that there will be $16.2 million of property tax generated over a 15-year period. This includes both county and property tax and other taxing entities. The city's portion over that 15-year period would be just over $2 million. And obviously that's subject to change depending on property values and the property tax rate within the city. With the sales tax increment in that second paragraph, Zions Bank is projecting that there will be nearly $30.7 million of sales tax incentive generated from the area, and that includes the city's option as well as the county's option from that area. So taking those numbers, I want to just walk through these. The first line, $30.7 million, that's the estimated sales tax from that area over the 15 years. The county's option is just over $6 million. That leaves $24.6 million earned by the city over 15 years. And again, these are projections based upon the buying power and Zion Public Finance's projections. So of that $24.6 million, under the current interlocal agreement, 70% of that would go to the CDRA. That would leave $7.3 million of sales tax kept by the city over 15 years, and add to that the property tax that would be generated from that area over 15 years would leave about $10 million of projected property and sales tax to Harriman from the auto mall area over a 15-year period. Of that, so going back again to this, we have $17.2 million that would go to the CDRA. So here's where your real discussion on an incentive cap would kick in. Of the $17.2 million that's projected to go to the CDRA over the 15-year period, by state law, 10% of that has to go to affordable housing. So that gets set aside. If we have our own housing authority, they would be subject, they would have the authority to use that. Otherwise, it would be, we would have to give that to the county's housing authority. That would leave $15.5 million roughly. Of that amount, we also have an obligation to pay for a condemnation settlement agreement for adjacent properties on the garden plots of $200,000. So of that amount, there's a projected $15.3 million available for incentives within the project area. And again, that's of the 70% of the sales tax generated from this area, subtracting only that 10% housing and the condemnation settlement agreement amount. So that gives you some ballpark about what an appropriate cap might be for an incentive. It's up to the CDRA board to determine what that is. The city has already committed 70%, but you're under no obligation to commit all 70% of that to one end user. You can say based upon the proposals that we have, we're going to contribute 30% or a dollar amount, and we're going to spread that over 15 years or 10 years. Really, you have multiple options about what you can do with that money and how much money to actually contribute as an incentive in connection with this project. So that's the primary. I think it'd be a good point to pause and talk about that before we jump on to who that should go to and what you'd like to see within the participation agreement about these items.
So you're wanting to know basically what dollar amount we're comfortable with?
If that's something you think you want to determine now, or you think it would be more appropriate to determine what that dollar amount would be.
Wait and negotiate. Is this going to be competitive?
Right.
We're told over and over and over. Why would we set anything in stone right now?
I think one of the points I would take away from our discussions with the developer of this project is it would be helpful for them to know what the board would consider, not necessarily what the amount is, so that they can then go to end users and say, the discussion that the board has had is, this would be an amount available. Would that be something that we could?
I'll consider anything. Bring the end user to us and we'll talk about it. There's no end user yet.
In my opinion, I don't have any problem using these funds on the project. So for me, setting a cap as to what the projected is fine. Mine for me, it's more how do we allocate it is the bigger question. And it's kind of my opinion that it's allocated based on the size of the property of the end user. That the more percentage of the property an end user buys and uses and develops, the more incentive they're eligible for. That's just my 2 cents on that. But as far as a dollar amount, I mean, I'm fine going up to what then, the tax rate is in that area.
This is sales tax, not property tax. If I'm an auto dealer, I'm not concerned about the footprint. I want to get that percentage of the sales tax that I bring in.
One thing that is common in other CDRA areas throughout the state is it's kind of first in benefits the most, and then it trickles down. So the last person to come in might receive just a minuscule portion or nothing at all. And that's a model that other places have used, even other auto malls have used to
So I think we
incentivize.
want to leave it open so we can negotiate
Yeah,
that,
because
right?
assume the same risk.
Or-
The first people in assume a larger risk.
Much larger risk.
And then the last people in get the benefit of being part of something that's already attracting business,
Or if there's one user,
right?
comes in and takes it all over, there you go.
There you go.
That's easy, right?
So it's
Anybody know anybody like that?
And if I recall, it seems like, I mean, I know it's been a little while since we've had this particular discussion, but it seems like the last time we did in terms of this, we were basically right in that ballpark is kind of what we were contemplating anyways at that time. And I think that was, for me, that was based on, again, the information that we had. It seems to be that that information really hasn't changed. I'm comfortable, again, really offering the amount that's allowed in that to help get that off the ground and to start seeing the full benefit of that coming in. To Jared's point, again, I think we leave that negotiation of how much to who open, because I think, again, it's going to take, unless you have one that is ready to come in and take over the whole site, there really has to be a little heavier incentive on the first one to get in the door and to get that project off the ground and going. And those are going to be the ones that we want to, I think, have more latitude to give more incentive to get that off, which will obviously in turn, we anticipate bring more with it as that develops out.
Okay.
I don't have no problem with it.
All right. Well, I think that's good discussion, and I think not only helpful for me as well as your counsel, but also for the developer who's, I'm sure, listening to this meeting as well and negotiating with end users to be able to take that back to them and say that this conversation's been had and that's this kind of where the discussion has headed.
I think we've been committed the whole time to say that we're willing to commit that amount in there to help get that project moving, to help get it off the ground, because we know the benefits that will come to the city down the road. So
Yeah, I think we've been pretty consistent.
I think we've been consistent on that, and the fact that, again, I think we've been very consistent too, to Jared's point on the messaging of that, again, we want to have discretion of how much goes to each user, and we want to be able to really incentivize that first one. It really takes the first one to come in and negotiate and to take that risk with us to help move this project forward.
That's all I have.
Okay. I will accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we close the Community Development and Renewal Agency of Harriman City special meeting. Now we will go to our general meeting. So we will begin our general meeting with a Pledge of Allegiance. That will be led for us by Lauren Palmer.
So please stand and follow me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the
Thank you. We are always appreciative of all participation in our meetings. We will move on to item 4.2, City Council comments and recognitions.
So I would just like to, it was not a city-sponsored event, but an event that wouldn't have happened, I would assume, without a lot of work by the city. And I would just like to thank Alex Boyer put on a concert last night right here at Crane Park. It was fantastic. There was probably between 5,000 and 6,000 people there. Most of them were youth. And it was just did a great job. I'm just going to read a couple of emails and texts I received. This is from a gentleman that was helping put it together. He says, I've been involved with putting together the Alex Boyer concert tonight, representing the ecclesiastical committee that conjured up the crazy idea. On behalf of the whole committee, I wanted to thank you and your team for all the support you provided in hosting this event. Wendy Thomas was an absolute hero. We couldn't have done it without her and her team. I know there were many people involved. There were so many details that were taken care of that weren't even on our radar. The AV, the parking, the food trucks, security around the facilities, custodial, even crossing guards. It was amazing. So thank you so much for all those who participated and helped. One other text on, the city did an amazing job. Wendy Thomas is absolutely incredible. I hope you all realize that. Please fire just so awesome. Thanks. It's an incredible city. It was fun to listen to him talk about Harriman City. He has great love for our community and great respect for our community. He actually was 3-year anniversary yesterday on a video that he did called Bend Not Break, just to inspire youth to keep on going on. So I really appreciate everyone's involvement on that and all the hard work that went into that, even though it wasn't necessarily a city-sponsored event. It was a lot of work went on here, so thank you for making sure that happens.
Okay. There's no further comments or recognitions. I'll move on to the public comment portion of our meeting. Audience members may bring any item to the City Council's attention. Comments will be limited to 2 minutes. State law prohibits the council from acting on items that do not appear on the agenda. Public comments for this meeting will also be conducted electronically. Any person interested in addressing the council may submit a comment by emailing recorder@harriman.org or by visiting harriman.org/agenda and minutes, where there is a link to fill out an online public comment form. Your statements will be read into the public record. We do have some public comments today that have already been submitted, so I'll invite those individuals to come up first. We do have at least one comment in regards to the public hearings that we have later. I will go ahead and hold off on those until the actual public hearing portion, so those can be recorded with that portion of our meeting. We will start with Pedro Martinez, if you want to come up, please.
Hello, my name is Pedro Martins. I live at 5674 West Cottage Road Circle, and I'm here because I'm currently dealing with a little bit of a headache with the city. About a year ago, I decided I wanted to put a shop in the back of my property. So having had some experiences going through the permitting process, I felt it was important to talk with the city and understand what the regulations are, requirements. So I got in touch with the planning department and worked with a gentleman named Nick Whitaker. And we spent several days having discussion back and forth so that I could understand what the rules were and what I was limited to. When the discussion was over, I said, hey, I've had people change their minds quite a bit when I went through my deck process. Can I at least get an email to record we had this conversation? And he emailed me and let me know. Essentially kind of covered some of the things we discussed. Soon after that, COVID got bad. Prices for everything started going crazy. So when I went in and talked to the city about getting my permit, they said it would only be valid for 6 months. And if I wasn't planning on starting to build the project right away, to wait. So I waited, and recently I submitted my permit as things kind of gotten semi-normal. And I was told that I got bad information and that what I had, the money I had spent to have a design done and engineered, stamped, was no good, and that I had needed to go back to the drawing board. And so I attended the Planning Commission meeting last week, and I've talked to several of the folks at the City Planning Department. They've all been very respectful, but at the end of the day, I feel like there's no accountability. I did my part as a citizen. I came to the city, who are the experts, and I said, what do I need to do? They gave me information. I took that information and went and spent money based on that advice. And now I'm just kind of getting the runaround. And I've learned that I'm not the only one in this situation. There's a pattern here. And even as I've looked around my neighborhood at lots the size of my lot, there's shops that have been built that are significantly higher than the stated 16 feet that I've been told. So I'm just looking for accountability and some help. Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to the next one, which we have, which is for Ryan Phillips.
Got my glasses. Okay, prior to the development of the lots on Silver Bowl Drive, the city of Harriman had plans to build a water retention berm on the property west of the subdivision in order to protect the homes that would be built there. Unfortunately, this project bogged down in bureaucracy, and Harriman instead left a makeshift berm that was not up to code and never intended as a long-term solution. Despite this, Harriman City issued building permits, knowing full well the danger posed by their makeshift berm, and they kept this information hidden from residents like myself. 3 weeks ago today, this unfinished berm collected the heavy rainfall throughout the day, then released it all at once when it ultimately failed, destroying my basement and much of my professional music equipment. Our basement tenants were immediately displaced and rendered homeless. By the grace of God, their young children were not at home when the water crashed through the windows and filled their rooms with a foot of water. Serious injury or possibly even death may have occurred. We're grateful the city helped us pump out the water, place sandbags, and left a dumpster for us, but since then, Harriman has denied to take any responsibility for their actions and leaving us residents to foot the bill. Section 63G of the Utah State Code grants the city full legal immunity from their negligent actions, and they know it. But legal immunity should not grant the city immunity from doing what is right. Our family business has struggled during the pandemic. We took out loans to finish our basement to generate a rental income. Now we've lost our renters, our basement is destroyed, and we're still paying for those loans. Incidentally, this devastation finally spurred some action, and this berm is now being properly constructed now after years of delay. Unfortunately for me, that's 2 weeks too late that they started. I'm not looking to get rich. I'm simply asking Harriman City to cover the losses caused by your actions, to look beyond the legality and look at the humanity. Harriman City's motto states that it's dedicated to providing courteous and efficient service to the public, preserving community identity, and promoting a high quality of life. I'm asking you to live up to those ideals. What terrible message are we sending to our children if our city leaders do something that they know is wrong simply because there is a law that says they're able to get away with it?
Thank you. Our next comment will be from Chris Martinson.
Hello, my name is Chris Martinson. I live in Harriman, and I'm a member of the Mission Church and a part of Voice for the Voiceless ministry. Less than a year ago, I asked to talk to the City Council and Mayor Watts about the city's pro-life stance on abortion. I gifted a book and requested time to talk. Mayor Watts instructed the City Council not to talk to me. All but one on the council complied. The City of Harriman can proclaim that they will stand against abortion. They must do it publicly. Harriman wants this proclamation. I'll be sending each of you a proposed proclamation by email this week. The Bible says that we are made in the image of God, formed in the womb. Science confirms this, that the difference between the baby at conception and the adult is form, not nature. I'll ask you this time to read, vote on, and pass the proclamation for a safe city for the unborn, and stand for life and not death. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next one will be from Shannon Youngblood.
Here on behalf of Harriman Rugby, as many of you know, we just placed #1 nationally, and we have been ranked #1 in Utah for the past 6 or 7 years. And as a Harriman Rugby parent, we find it really hard for our boys being the only school pretty much in our area of Utah that does not have their own playing field, that we have to fight for what we need and where we need to go to play, and our boys are bounced from field to field to field. And what we're here to do is try to get a partial of that Olympia Hills development that's coming up. I know that we have 2 of them out there, and we just want a place for our boys to play safely and have a regular home to go to that we can have and host an extra 3 to 4 games each season. Right now, we have to pay out of pocket and tons of fundraising going on for our boys just so they can play during the year, because we have to pay for our own facility. We currently have to pay to have our boys play at our own stadium at Harriman High because we're not associated with the school. It's just a club sport, but we are, like I said, ranked nationally. So, I mean, that's something to be kind of proud of with our boys. But what we really want is a place for our boys to call their own, that we don't have to fight for over band with Harriman High. Right now, we're practicing at Copper Mountain Middle School, which the principal graciously gives us a little bit of field for, but we'd like it where parents and players and teams from all over Utah can come and play with us as we do when we go down to St. George or other parts of Salt Lake or Utah. So at this time, we just are asking for a safe place for our boys to play, a place for our boys to have competition and games that we can host, that we don't have to pay for. And so we're just hoping that we can get from you that today. So thank you.
Thank you. That brings me to the end of the comment forms I have. I do know we have some digital as well, so before I open it to those here in the audience, we'll turn the time over to our recorder for any digital that we have, and then we'll open up to anybody in the public. Yes.
This comment is made by Jeff and Stephanie Brooks. Our home was directly impacted by a faulty berm that was placed on private property west of our home on Silver Bowl Drive. Harriman City partnered with the property owners on placing a berm at the end of the street to mitigate ongoing flooding issues within the neighborhood. Harriman City has maintained this berm for months. On August 18th, the faulty berm broke and flooded the entire street. Harriman City has refused any liability and stated that they don't have to cover any damages due to governmental immunity. Harriman City should have seen this in the design phase and required either the developer or the private property owner to remedy the problem. Instead, the residents on Starlight Hill have had all of their claims denied and have been told by the city that they won't help the homeowners who have been impacted by the berm that broke. This is the berm that the city built and maintained. Fast forward to 2 weeks from August 18th, and coincidentally enough, Harriman City has implemented a long-term solution to rebuild the berm, then has been reconstructing it for the last week. If the city is not responsible for the damage that the homeowners incurred, then why is the city taking responsibility and rebuilding the berm? This next public comment I received is from Brett West. My name is Brett West. My family was renting a basement apartment in Harriman for the last 10 months. On August 18th, during the rain, the berm the city created just east of our rental broke and water came rushing into the neighborhood. There was so much water, the windows in our children's bedrooms were shattered, spraying glass and water all over their beds. When we arrived on scene, there was at least 8 inches of water throughout the house. It was a miracle this didn't happen the night with our children sleeping next to the windows. We have lost thousands of dollars of items and memorabilia that can't be replaced. We have also been displaced and have had to seek temporary living arrangements. The city is refusing to accept any responsibility. We are not the only victims, but I want to let the council know that our family of 6 has been totally upended by this. I would ask kindly that the city do the right thing on this issue and make things right with all those affected. Thank you. That is all the comments I've got.
All right, if there are any members of the audience that would like to make public comment at this time, we ask you to come up to the podium and state your name.
Hello, my name's Brandon Priest. I'm one of the senior coaches from the Harriman High mountain bike team. And recently I was made aware of the new hunting area in our hills and realized that our mountain bike teams practice on those same trails as hunters are being allowed. I have been up there in previous years with hunters trying to ride bikes with these kids, and I can't tell you how terrifying it is to have a bow drawn or a gun pointed in the same general direction as we're riding. I'm only asking that the council reconsider the hunting area to exclude the Harriman trails so we could have a safe place for our kids to ride. It only takes one mistake to cause a terrible problem. Thank you.
All right, seeing no further comment, we will close the public comment portion of our meeting. We will now move on to City Council Board and Committee reports.
I'll go quickly. Just one meeting attended over the past, since our last meeting. It was for the Wasatch Front Regional Council. They are working on their updated Wasatch Choice Plan. And just to be aware, they have a tentative, I don't have a location yet, but they do have a tentative workshop that says in the southwestern Salt Lake County area, scheduled for Monday, October the 25th. So as we continue to get information on that, we'll make sure that we push that out for those to be aware and provide their input of the upcoming Wasatch Choice Workshop. And then the other item really of significance that came out of the meeting was an amendment to the 2021-2026 Transportation Improvement Plan or Program, otherwise known as the TIP. They did do some additional funding for 4 projects in there, 3 of which are in Salt Lake County, and then 1 in Huntsville. None of them out here in the southwest corner of the valley currently, but there were, again, additional funding allocated for additional transportation projects within the county, one being on Vine Street in the Murray area, another one in Cottonwood Heights, Bengal Boulevard, and 2300 East near the high school there, and then another one which is on 4700 South from 4000 West to 5600 West. And so all of those amendments were approved by the board for additional funding for those projects to move forward. And that's all I have out of Wasatch Front.
Early in the meeting this time, so I don't know, next week.
Next week we'll have it all, right? All right, we will move on to the public hearing portion of our meeting. As we do get into these public hearing items, the same rules will apply as during our public comment. There's a two-minute time window that will be enforced, as well as possible electronic comments. I believe we do already have some that we'll be reading in. The first comment form that we have received in regards to our first item, which is 7.1, public hearing related to the proposed Olympia Master Development Agreement. Chase, do you want to speak to this one real quick before we get started?
Do we want to have a presentation on this item
Please.
first? Okay. Is it my turn?
Yes, it's your turn.
Thank you, Mayor. So just wanted to give some brief background on this item. So you're not required by state law to have a public hearing at this level. We have determined as a city council that you would like to have that. That's the reason why we're doing this. We have already had a public hearing and a recommendation on this land use item from the Planning Commission. They recommended approval of this item with conditions. Those conditions have been identified and addressed in this draft of the development agreement, as well as in the design guidelines. The copy of the development agreement that was included in the packet does include red lines. Those red lines identify items that were addressed by the council at the August 9th city council meeting, as well as the August 26th meeting with Councilmember Shields and Councilmember Smith, who were authorized by a majority of the council to negotiate some of these additional items with the developer. So those are the red lines that you're seeing in this draft agreement, again, which has already been discussed by the Planning Commission. They've held a public hearing on that. Under state law, the city council can make any additional changes to that development agreement as recommended by the Planning Commission. And even though there is no requirement that a public hearing be held, again, we've identified that there should be one, at least for our purposes, to get that feedback as we continue to work on the terms and conditions of this development agreement. I'm happy to address any questions from the council with regard to some of the additional items that have been redlined, and filled any other discussion points that you
If I
may
might
have.
have a moment, just a couple of items. There's something that was discussed in our meeting last week, but some of the solutions offered in here were not negotiated specifically. As it references item 2.10 to the commercial development within the planned community, one of the things that we had discussed was that acreage was a poor basis for determining the amount of commercial element that should be in the development. And we wanted to come up with a different way of defining that. The effort we had was around defining the gross leasable square feet as a better determinant of, well, what that should be. These numbers that are listed in 2.10.1 and 2.10.2 of 300 and 100 were not numbers that were negotiated specifically. And just by disclosure, I'm not sure where those numbers came from or why those are the numbers that were put in here. If I'm being frank, I don't know what the right numbers are there. We know what the county had proposed for amounts of square footage and stuff, but I don't know where they got those numbers from. I don't know what those are based off. I don't know what formulas they used. And I don't know what formulas we've used. The concern that I have is that in the design standards, specifically around village center and town centers, which are areas where there's the most intense use and the most significant amount of residential density, that we have in our design standards, the requirements, well, not requirements, but expectations of retail, service, employment center, all of these elements being part of what is a justification for that intensity of development. It is a backbone of that vision of that part of the development. My concern is that without a better defined number around this commercial and what that actually does need to look like, and again, I don't know if that's 8,000 or 800,000. I don't know. I don't have anything to base it off of. I think that we definitely need to have a little better understanding and justification for what these numbers are, what they should be, and are they reflective of what is reasonable amounts in there. My initial thought was to propose a substantially higher amount of commercial, with the understanding that there's the potential of additional land that it's in our annexation plan, that could have commercial development on it or other things. And should those come to pass at some future date, additional office space, retail space, commercial space that's adjacent to but outside of the project could be used to offset some of the requirement inside the project, if that makes sense. That they were saying, you put in 1 million square feet, but if 500,000 is across the street, it's essentially the same thing. So I'm just spitballing. I don't really have a solution here, other than I think that we need to have a much broader discussion and definition around that particular topic. One other item that we had negotiated that we hadn't put in here was an if-then clause around the trailhead, the 50-acre trailhead park that the county has approved funding for, including the bike trail and all of that stuff, that outlined the developer's willingness to work with the county on securing the land and facilitating potential land swaps between Utah State and/or the county and whatever those mechanisms are and however they take place, aren't necessarily entirely under the developer's control. So I'm comfortable with there being an if-then statement saying, if these things happen, then the developer will move forward and will proceed with the 50-acre trailhead. If they don't, we need to specify what the alternatives are and how that's going to play out. So those are just my 2 comments. There's a couple other housekeeping things I emailed you about earlier, Chase, but they're of minor consequence. So.
Any further discussion by this council before we go into the public hearing?
My only question is, I haven't received anything, not a word about these negotiations. Is there anything else that we need to know besides what's in the packet?
Not that
I can highlight a few things that that have been discussed. One was the removal of the IRC. The Planning Commission recommended that be readdressed, and the discussion from the City Council on the August 9th meeting was, try to find a way to change that up a little bit. In working with the development team on that, rather than trying to figure out a way to do that, we just defaulted back to our general approval practices and changed, it's in your development agreement, actually. I'll just go to that page. It's one of the exhibits, Exhibit F. It just identifies who the approving bodies are for certain development applications. Traditionally, single-family home building or subdivisions have been approved by the Planning Commission. Under state code, those are allowed to be approved administratively, and the provisions that we've drafted within Section 4 of the development agreement simply state that if a subdivision application for individually platted residential dwelling units is submitted to the city that complies with the terms of the development agreement, it can be approved administratively. So if it has the setbacks, if it's got the design criteria, if it has all the other design standards that are required by the design guidelines and the development agreement, that staff can approve that. If there's a deviation from that, it would have to go up through the Planning Commission and City Council approval process. The other items on there identify, again, who the approving body is. One other change would be with an initial conditional use permit, rather than taking an initial conditional use permit to the Planning Commission, this would be heard by the city's appeal authority, which is a David Church, a third party that we contract with to hear land use items. Because conditional use permits are very much objective in nature, having a third party simply review that and determine whether or not the objective criteria are established made sense to plug that person in rather than having conditional use permits initially heard by the Planning Commission. If there is a modification to an initial conditional use permit, that would then go to the Planning Commission, who would hear that subsequently and make a determination. So that was one of the changes, was the removal of the IRC, and then the establishment of the approval processes for different development applications, again, spelled out in section, I believe, 4 and highlighted in, yes, section 4 and then highlighted in Exhibit F. One of the other things that we discussed was, with the assistance of our Assistant City Manager, Wendy Thomas, some additional and stricter open space provisions, specifically with amenities, the number and type of amenities to be included in different parks. Previously, there was just a provision that a park, depending on the size of it, had to include X number of amenities. And it had a list of approved amenities, anywhere from a barbecue and a water fountain to a park bench. And so we said, we need to do a little better job of making sure that we have scalable amenities depending upon the size of the park. And so we sat down with the development team and worked through that and came up with a list of major and minor amenities and the number of major amenities that needed to be included in each type of park and the number of minor amenities that needed to be included in each park. We also had a discussion about if the city wanted to add to that amenity list, we would be on the hook for that, right? The minimum standards in place for the developer, and we would come in and supplement if there were a rugby field, for example, that we wanted to install. That's in the design guidelines.
Just somewhere in the design.
In the section 6, I believe, is section 5 or section 6 is the parks and open space.
A couple other things that now I'm thinking about, we discussed was the K Park, right? And the construction of that is a kind of an initial,
What's a K park?
So if you,
it's
yeah, if you
Park
look
K and somebody else's plat, you know?
if you look on Exhibit B, 1 is the Parks Master Plan. At about the middle of that layout for Olympia, you'll see in the Hidden Oaks development, their master plan is kind of projected on this exhibit as well. There's a green area next to the neighborhood park in the middle of that master plan where the developer for Hidden Oaks has an obligation to develop, I believe it's about 7 acres of park. In working with the development team,
That's where I got, okay.
we found a way to utilize adjacent space on the Olympia property to essentially double the size of that park. And they're willing to contribute that 7 acres as well. Their obligation under the development agreement is to improve all of the parks. However, with the K Park, they're willing to dedicate that land to us. They would use part of it for their retention and detention, and then the rest of it we would be on the hook for developing. But they're willing to deed that 7 acres to us for us to develop with the adjacent 7 acres of the Hidden Oaks development. Yeah.
And then the other thing that we did talk about is that on that same exhibit, that Exhibit B, on the far right-hand side, the east side, where 6400 West comes in and kind of has that little V at the roundabout there, the creation of a park there as part of the kind of initial development and construction of the road right away, because they will need water retention stuff, right?
We have a map that we can pull up on the screen for the residents.
But it's, what do we figure it was? 4 acres, 5 acres, something like that?
Yeah.
That it's a pretty good sized little park, and it would allow for some programmable space to come in, kind of at the first part of the development here that we thought was a nice way to start out the development, let's put it that way.
And who's responsible to build it?
They are. So with the exception of the 7 acres that would be donated to us that we're calling the K Park, that's what the.
Can you highlight that K Park on the boundary there real quick?
So
That one is the one that matches on both sides of the two properties.
Yeah, that's
The other one that we've been talking about is that long, narrow, skinny, tall one up to.
That was this one
the
right
farther,
here.
one on the farthest
Sorry,
right-hand
the other
side.
one. Okay, thank you.
It's called it's labeled NP on
Just
6400
neighborhood
West.
part, Yeah.
And to answer Councilmember Henderson's question, their obligation is to provide improved parks, and their requirement is to fund all of those consistent with the design guidelines and the requirements therein, with the exception of the K Park.
And those requirements are, they have to have so many of whatever list.
Correct. Yep, and that's also spelled out in the design guidelines, the major and minor amenities for each size, whether it's a pocket park, a neighborhood park, a community park.
I was wondering on the parks, why did we just settle at 20%? Because our current ordinance requires 25%. It has some, if there's topography issues and things like that, undevelopable land and things like that, you don't get the same credit at the 20%, you have to go higher. I was curious why we didn't apply our current ordinance to this development.
Good question. It was just a negotiated item. One of the discussion points was that all of these, so you'll see the areas with really steep topography are on the south end near the trailhead. North of that, just along the north side of the Spine Road, you'll also see some really steep topography, which we might classify as undevelopable. The discussion around that was that it'll be improved with a trail, right? And so that was part of the discussion, but again, it was just one of the negotiated points of the Parks and Open Space provision of the development agreement.
And our negotiators are okay with that?
It's
We're asking all the questions because we haven't gotten a report
it's
from their meetings.
It's a proposal at this point, right? That this represents the discussions to date, if you will.
That was one of the first things that popped out when I looked at this map was like, where's all the park space? Right, we're supposed to have all that space to offset the density, but
What's the total acreage here that we're seeing on this map?
923, 922?
No, the total acreage of parks, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
What's the total park acreage?
I haven't calculated that.
They,
That'd be good to
I
know
know they
that.
had it.
And then the total number of acres that are just basically trails, right? That include that steep part. That's kind of why we put that ordinance into place, so that the density and the intensity of that density doesn't overwhelm an area, and that's the densest area, right? I'd say that's an initial question.
The part of the discussion that we did have is that this does not represent the 20% requirement. It's only half or 2/3 of what that requirement is. This also does not depict pocket parks and community parks, small parks under 2 acres.
under 2 acres.
Yeah,
This
under the
only-
development,
yeah.
sorry, Councilman.
I was just gonna say, one of the points I wanted to make is this only depicts anything that, again, that the city would accept, which has to be 2 acres or larger. So that's all that's really depicted here. It does not incorporate all of the open space that will be dedicated throughout to meet that 20% throughout. And again, a very good question by Councilman Henderson, but again, as we talk about some of the steeper terrain, what it does is, again, part of the discussion is obviously it preserves a bunch of the open space along some of the topography that will be lined with the trails and the connectivity in there. Again, I think in areas where, at least from my perspective, in areas where we've had steep topography before, there haven't been those other types of improvements on it, like trails and those types of things, where we've gotten just that open space dedication with nothing else. So as part of the discussion here, again, for at least consideration is that even though there's, I guess some of this area would be considered undevelopable because of the slope, we're still getting amenities through it with the trail connectivity through there. And so again, that was part of the discussion and part of the consideration for us to make on this area.
So a question for Chase, or maybe it's Wendy. When we do parks on like retention basins, they get like if they put the amenities on it, do we give them credit for that with the amenities, or how does that work? If they improve. Sorry, I'm not sure who to ask.
The microphone doesn't go that far. In this agreement, if they do the low-impact development underground, then they get the 100% open space counting for it. But if they don't do the low-impact stormwater development,
What I'm saying is currently in the city, if another developer was to come in and look at a retention pond and they put a park on that retention pond, would they get credit for that as open space as opposed to just getting the detention pond credit? Wendy's shaking her head yes.
yeah, I'm
Say that.
thinking through all the agreements, and I believe.
So I'm just trying to look at being consistent. If we have in the past said that if you develop and provide an additional amenity, we give them credit for it, that would be consistent in this
But
particular.
not on undevelopable property. That's why that was specifically called out in the ordinance we put in place.
But I believe if it has a trail through it, and these will be asphalt trails, not primitive trails, it would count.
For our current ordinance.
I would think so. We haven't run into it.
There was a percentage based on the amount that was usable.
25%. If it's.
I think.
I know there are agreements, there are agreements that have varying levels of contribution percentages based upon the type of open space that it is.
But it's not out of the realm of things we've done in the past. They get credit for things they normally would not be able to put property on, that we give them additional credit towards the open space if they develop it further than just.
It has to be a system improvement.
It does,
And
yeah.
these trails would be system improvements.
Be considered system improvements. Okay, thank you.
And I'll add to that, this development agreement's actually stricter in that sense, that a detention basin needs to be improved in order to receive open space
Open
credit.
space credit at all.
Right, whereas other agreements simply allow for that credit,
That 50% credit or whatever it is.
regardless of whether it's improved with any amenities or not.
So everything green is a trail, right?
Yeah, the green lines, yeah.
Yes, the green lines, and it's my understanding that one of these is a dual-use trail, so horse and.
Yeah, John, will you scroll down to the next slide?
But, let's see, a chunk of that, sorry.
This is the
Huge
Trails
chunk
Master
of
Plan.
that trail is in the Danzy property, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But those other
Hayden
purple
Oaks.
trails are still are multi-use
Okay.
improved trails, correct?
The only one that is the equestrian path is the one that goes through Danzig.
Danzig's.
That
Down through the
connects
blue.
with Midas Creek on the north along
But
6400
all the purple
west.
ones are still developed trails, correct?
Yes, they're asphalt paths.
Yes.
But this is mostly just Danzig.
I mean, that portion is the Danzig. There is portion
Yeah.
both on the east and the west side and this property that would,
Yeah.
that connects those two together is what I'm saying.
Hopefully we'll talk about some of these more, but is there anything else from those meetings that we need to know?
I was a little bit confused. I read through this, but then I read just this afternoon. I thought, oh, I bet there's minutes, but there was only minutes from one of the meetings that have been had since this for the MDA. It was my understanding there was going to be a meeting Thursday and then the following, I believe, Tuesday. There's not minutes from that Tuesday meeting, so I wasn't able to find out what was discussed there. But I was concerned about some of the minutes talking about the 6330 units. That has been a talking point in ever since this has came to the city. I've been asking about that. So I was kind of disheartened when I read that it's too late to talk about it because all the figures are in place or something. So that was rather disheartening for me because I don't believe that was the case. I think that I've voiced that concern for a long time, the number of units. But then it talks about basically those 6,300 units can kind of go anywhere. The only thing, so there would never really be a reduction on the count because they're not tied to a density per acre. So if a school came in and took out 100 acres right there or whatever, a church, and they would still be allowed those 6,300 units. They would just go wherever they could go, other than they have to be tied to neighborhood, village, or town center, as long as those didn't exceed their capacity, the range densities. So they could get shoved into that even if they weren't necessarily intended to go there. Is that correct? Am I reading that correctly?
John, if you'll scroll up 2 slides, one more. Yes, so here's the land use master plan. And you're partially right, yes. So if a church were to go in say the orange area, which is, I don't remember the name of that village type, but that's up to 20 units an acre. If that took up 3 acres, if they can fit more units in there and not exceed that 20 unit per acre maximum that's established within that place type, then you're correct. They wouldn't necessarily lose those units from that 3 acres where the church went in.
But they don't get to count the 3 acres towards that calculation, correct?
But the acreage has nothing to do with it.
Acreage has nothing to do with it. It's the number of units that can be fit within these place types. And the place types establish what the densities are. Really, the units per acre are within those place types. So, for example, the red area can have over 20 units an acre.
Yeah, the red area is the highest dense, and I guess part of that concern to me is that when we were negotiating the MDA on the Hidden Oaks development, the constant discussions were the farther west we went that we wanted to be less dense. So these last sections right here on the Hidden Oaks were intended to be the less dense piece because they pushed out farther. And then you'll notice it's just not in harmony to be crashing into really high dense area right there. That was concerning to me. Especially, I ride out there all the time. I can look over there and see the impacts that would have. It's just, anyway, just a personal observation that I felt like I don't know that this farthest out makes sense to have that highest dense. And it's my understanding we're locking these in, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is where they're locked in. That's where the highest density is going to be. And it can reach that really high number because something could go right here and push it to the highest number over there because they're not losing anything if they sell off a portion of it to a church or something that was not going to build, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And again, the idea is that so the I don't know what color this is, yellow, the lightest color on there.
Yeah.
Right, that's up to 8 units an acre. That would be an area where you would likely see that loss of units if you had a 3 or 5 acre facility go in because their density or their units per acre that's allowed there is so low that they're likely to feel that impact. In the red area, the highest density areas, they're not likely to recognize that impact because they can just stack some more apartments.
Is there no
somewhere else.
maximum in the red?
There is no maximum. It's over 20 units an acre.
That
Which
red-
you see in apartment type
Right.
developments, right? The town center apartments next to us are about 25 units an acre.
Just concerning that the very, very farthest west portion of our whole city would be the highest density.
Well, I think, again, I don't want to speak for them, but in the discussions there, I think that the intent of preserving some of that space, because that also encompasses the commercial and retail development component of that, and that is out there where, again, potentially where you have a potential connection right there bordering U-111, and if it does connect through at some point going, 20 years from now, going up Butterfield Canyon, that becomes a potentially prime location for that type of development to try and capture that. And so that was intentional there to try and preserve some of that space, again, for future planning and be able to capture, again, along a major corridor, and again, a possible future connection for that type of development.
Yeah, it's still just concerning to me, just without the east-west access. I understand U-111. I drive it very, very often, but it only offers an option of north and south, not east and west.
Any further discussion before we move into the public hearing portion?
Anything else from those negotiations?
Absolutely.
I think it's just simply said, obviously there is notes, and I believe there was notes from both of
Said,
those.
I'd like to get a
correct?
report
Yeah,
if we can.
didn't see it on there, so if you could.
We had
keep
both of
posted,
them.
That would be great.
But
Understood.
yeah, I would say, and Steve, please correct me, or any member of staff that was in there, we had 7 members of staff that were in there with us as well. I would say that anything that was talked about is reflected in the MDA itself and the current language in there. That was our goal, is to go in there and talk about those issues that had been identified, where there was concern expressed by members of the council, whether it was staff or even the developer themselves. And the whole goal was obviously to come out of there with as plain and as clear and concise of language as possible to address each of those issues that obviously is contained in that document right there. So, we talked about a myriad of things. I think it's for me to try and summarize it outside of the language that's contained in the MDA itself would be inaccurate, because again, our whole goal was to make it very clear within the MDA. So I don't know,
So
Steve, do you want to?
That's a little bit frustrating for, the two of us that voted against doing it this way. We have no context. We have to just go figure out what you talked about.
Well, no, we've got the notes that was taken there as well.
That's why I just asked if we could get some of that information to give us some context, so we're not just guessing. And Steve's indicated that there are several things that are still up in the air. That's kind of my question is, because what have you guys agreed to, and what is there left for us to have input on?
I think let's be clear. As 2 members of the council, we can't agree.
We can't agree to anything.
We could just propose things. So I want to be really clear. None of this constitutes an agreement. This constitutes some proposals and counter proposals, and kind of the structure on which all those proposals might be carried out. As far as units, land use, commercial square footage, park locations, other than maybe this K Park and maybe this 4-acre thing over here, we don't really negotiate any park locations or sizes or configurations. That wasn't the purpose of what we were. I don't know if that's what your expectation was, but I didn't want to be in a position where I'm trying to say, well, this is what all 5 of us think is the right thing to do. It was just trying to say, let's take all of the comments that we did make as a group in that work meeting and find the best way to incorporate that stuff into this, so that it's not just this loose framework, with all these holes in it, that it's actually gotten down to say, okay, here's a workable document, And there's some areas where there's a number here that we can debate. There's a configuration thing we can debate, but it's actually attached to real exhibits and real verbiage and things like that. So at least, so as far as negotiations, there wasn't any
Agreement made. Yeah, I think
that's a really good way
I
to say
think,
it.
Steve, I think you put that very well, because I think what the MDA is that's in front of all of us tonight for consideration is representative of really just a lot of work by a lot of people trying to work through the issues that we had heard and the concerns that we had to give us something to really consider as a council. I mean, when you had Nathan, Wendy, Tammy, Chase, Blake, Justin, and Michael, all from staff in there. And I mean, let's be real here. Those are the ones that are doing the real, digging in and making sure that we're meeting standards and those types of things. And then you had 5 members from the property owner and their team in there as we talked through these issues. That's what it was. It was a collaboration of the issues that we had heard from each other and the opportunity to put down, again, there was no agreements on anything made. This is now here for public comment and for full consideration of the council. And I think everything is still up for consideration in there. But we had to get us to a point that at least we all felt somewhat comfortable with to begin this public process now. And I think that was done very well with everyone that was involved.
I think I would put it this way. I think it's complete but imperfect.
Yep.
Right? Saying that I think it's now a full MDA, but it's not finished in terms of however we want to
Some of the specifics.
accomplish some of the specifics, right? My concern was that we would be having a public meeting and have an MDA that had, well, we haven't finished section 4 and we don't have exhibits and none of that stuff would be completed, and that was concerning to me. I couldn't see us having a public meeting without that information. But at this point,
Well, I guess that was maybe for clarification's sake, that was my frustration at the last meeting, is that's what I was expecting in that meeting, right? We had our special council meeting to go over those basic things that we all kind of agreed on, gave Chase direction to put that document together to bring to us the next time. So it's good to hear the explanation and that we are still open to suggestions
Absolutely.
on everything. This is just a framework at this point, because honestly, as a member of the council and what's proposed to the public, it doesn't look that way, right? It looks like this is what's been negotiated. Now we check the box and see what people say.
No, this is the opportunity now for everyone to review that publicly. And to go back to your first comment about the expectation of the last meeting, I guess my expectation or my understanding was probably a little different than yours because, again, because of the holes that existed within the MDA at that point, I think that was unfair of us to expect Chase to be the one to go fill in those
Just like to
holes.
remind the council, got to be careful about having side conversations. Thank you.
I would just say, I think it would be unfair of us as a body to expect Chase to be the sole person to go and to really hash through some of those issues that were there to be able to fill in the gaps that existed last time. And because I don't think that that's Chase's job. I think it's Chase's job to make sure that as we consider all of the language in there, that it's the right language that protects the city, but not to come up with the language per se as it relates to the specifics of the development agreement. And so I think that was probably a little bit of a misunderstanding between members of the council of what that expectation was, because that wasn't my expectation going into the last meeting, where we had it, knowing, again, the discussions that had taken place previously and the big gaps that still existed in there. I think that was the place for the expertise of staff to come into play, but a couple people to really sit down and hash through that to put language to it so that now we can have it in front of us for consideration.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of things we were talking about, we as a council talked about, even the public comment we got last time about, it's not so much whether it's annexed, it's not so much even all of the compositional elements, whether it's 62% or 5%, or that kind of stuff. I mean, we can definitely spend time getting into the weeds and having those discussions. I think that the bigger pictures of whatever it is that we put in the agreement is does the agreement bind the developer to that plan, right? Are we gonna get what it is that we think we're gonna get? And that's where I think we closed the gap, is that we tightened up all of the language around those things. We put in if, then kind of things, you know, that says, well, if this happens, you're gonna do this. If this doesn't happen, then we'll do this. What this and this is, we still need to maybe define a little bit, but there's language now that contemplates shifting plans. There's language that says, you know, if you don't do this, it doesn't alleviate your responsibilities to do all these other things. It ties up all the infrastructure inside the development to the developer with no fallback on the city or future taxpayers or sales tax revenue or general fund stuff. So I think in that way, it really captures so many of those, I would call them thematic things that we're talking about.
So this is just the basic framework, and now we can go through the process.
I would say that's fair. I mean, that's what we're hoping to do, is now is the time to get public comment, and then for us as a council to start digging through it and make our recommendations and suggestions. And that may lead to further, you know, work meetings that need to be done and more lifting that needs to be taken care of and more specific negotiations that need to take place. But at this point, I think it's just saying, here's a pretty, if you take out the specifics regarding how many units it is or the park alignments, it's a really damn good MDA. And I think it's a good place for us to start from.
Mayor, part of the process of a public hearing is also to hear from the applicant.
That's where I was going next. I will give the opportunity to the applicant if the applicant would like to speak. The applicant's welcome to come up and speak at this time. Not required to do, but it is up to the applicant if they'd like to come up and speak at this time. Brave man.
What's that?
You're a brave man.
Oh, I thought you said you only have 1 minute. I thought that's what you said.
I'll give you 2.
No, you're good. I'm happy to answer any questions. It's been a very robust process for months and months and months, and I've appreciated all the hard work from staff. One thing that I did want to point out to you, Councilmember Henderson, was one thing that we did agree to is that we would have a minimum of a 2-acre park within a half-mile radius of every home. And one of your concerns at the previous meeting, there's not a laser pointer here, but I don't know who's running the mouse, but there's a linear park in the center of our highest density area. That's a direct result of one of the comments that you made about having open space, you know, in the highest density areas. And those, we've taken special care to link these parks to the trail system. And okay. So, oh wow, we got two-tone going. Okay, so that park, can you see what I circled?
We definitely cannot see that.
No, but we know what you're talking about.
It's circled on my
We can
screen,
see
but
it.
He's got to turn on.
The
on
green in
his
the
end.
middle of the red.
The big
Yeah.
Central Park thing. Yeah.
there you go. It's a linear park in the center. So I just wanted to point that out. The one thing, oh, there we go. One thing that we heard from the Planning Commission and several members of the council, before we had a requirement that we'd have a park within a quarter-mile radius of every home. That was a requirement put on the development by the county. That was important to them. What we heard from the Planning Commission and council was, we don't love that because some of those will be pocket parks. And so one of the things that we agreed to was, let's bump it to a half-mile to make the parks bigger, because that's what we heard is from the council and Planning Commission was, we don't want a bunch of little parks, we want some more sizable where we can get some programmable space. So if you scroll to that parks plan, you'll see that you probably don't have the one with the rings, but we do have a map that shows how we would satisfy that half-mile requirement.
They do. I saw it this morning.
So, and it looks really nice, and again, all the parks linked to trails, and anyway, we're really excited about where we're headed and the refinements that have come from this plan from working with the staff and with the city. So anyway, happy to answer any questions. We can allow the public hearing to move forward, and then.
The only real question I have, I mean, dealing with a good framework now and moving through the meat of the process and the public's involvement, is there anything regarding units phasing with commercial and all the things that we've talked about, these general concepts, is there anything that you view as non-negotiable or nope, we have to have X?
Well, I think we're pretty set on our unit counts. We've done traffic studies. I mean, in order to start that process over would be quite substantial at this point. So with our entitlements at the county, yeah, we're pretty set on our unit count numbers. The commercial, we don't have any commercial requirements with the county. There are numbers in there, but there's no obligation to build any commercial. We've proposed, the square footage numbers that are in there now are proposals from us. So to answer your question, Councilmember Shields, where we proposed 300,000 square feet if we have the intersection of U111 and 126 South on the site. If it's not, then we proposed 100,000 because if that moves off site, that would be very detrimental to the commercial viability in that area right there. So those numbers came from us, and those are things that we could talk about. And right now I'm working with some consultants to provide the city with some support and backup for those numbers. So that's something we can definitely talk about.
Just because I can see members of the audience reacting to some of the statements you made. Can we just get some clarification? It doesn't have to be right now, just in regards to the requirement that was but the statement that was just made about the requirement from the county being, there were numbers, but they're not actually required to build those numbers.
So the county's design guideline actually prohibited any commercial development over 75,000 square feet?
Over 75 acres. We couldn't have
Acres.
any
But
more.
there-
Yeah, so we had a
Okay.
cap.
So had a cap on what commercial they could actually build within the project.
And then, I mean,
But there was no requirement to actually build.
Right.
That was one of the-
So it was the cap that was there, but it was not a requirement.
There was
They
no,
had to
there was
build
no
one-
hard and fast
1
requirement.
point whatever million square feet of
Right. Commercial space, yes.
I just have a point of curiosity,
Yeah.
and probably shouldn't ask this in a public meeting. You've been approved with the county for about a year and a half now. You've been entitled to them. I'm curious why you didn't move forward with the county, why you're now here at Harriman requesting to annex.
That's a good question. When COVID hit, we paused to see what was going to happen. As we kind of started to come out of COVID, which we're going back in apparently, but as we started to come out, the city approached us actually. So that's why I'm standing here today, not because I asked to be here. We were asked to be here, and
I'd like to clarify that by the city. It was specifically council members, including myself, was one of those individuals
Yeah.
that started that process. I just want to make sure that it's clear that it wasn't staff that approached it. It was
Correct.
members of this body that approached
That's
it.
correct.
I was just curious. It
No,
seemed like it.
it's a fair question.
It would have been, I'm like, why are they here? Why wouldn't they just get going? with
Maybe the
county?
question is what's advantageous to you to start the process over here versus going with what you have approved?
Ryan, and maybe you could, because there was some language in the county's MDA that talked about annexation, so
Sure.
this might be a good time to kind of tie that into it so that everyone understands what that requirement
Sure.
was.
No, it's a fair question. So we have a requirement in our county MDA that at some point, which was it, once we had built 1,500 units, that we needed to initiate or start on an annexation process or incorporation process to form our own city.
Right.
When we were invited, I guess, or asked by a couple members of the council to come in, we said, from a consistency and cohesive standpoint, it makes more sense to start the project and finish the project in one jurisdiction rather than start in the county. And then, you know, if we were to come into Harriman at that point, then you start to have a hodgepodge of street lights. You start to lose some of the continuity, right? And so we thought, when Harriman approached us, which we didn't really think this was an option, based on some of the things that we had heard and seen, we said, well, I don't know. Let's see if it's really a sincere invitation. And it has definitely felt like it has been. It's been not easy. I'm not kidding. It's been a process and a journey, and but I think the project has actually been refined and is much better where it's at today than what we have in the county. So.
Thank you for answering my question.
Yeah.
That's all I have.
Well, I'm happy to come back up if you have any further questions.
Mayor, if I can just make one comment, because I was going to mention, you know, the half-mile thing for the park, and then our conversation kind of went, you know, in a different direction. But I think I think it would be very advantageous, you know, if we can get a copy of that particular exhibit that shows the half-mile rings to, you know, with the minutes. You know, as we get that distributed to all members of the council so that they know those. Because I think that really demonstrates, I don't think it's in here.
It's a separate.
But I think again, it really clearly illustrates, again, the thought that went in, at least to that part of the discussion, and shows, again, that how within that, as we kind of moved from that quarter-mile discussion to the half-mile discussion, and you see the connectivity of the trails in there and how you can get to basically a lot of these parks from any location in there within or shorter than that half mile. I think it really demonstrates, again, a thoughtfulness of at least some of the values that we've had in the community for a long time, which is trails and open space and connectivity, and how that has been thoughtfully applied, at least to this point in the process, and taking the feedback that has been heard, again, on maybe a quarter mile is too short, breaking up some of those intense uses with that linear park in there and a few of those things. But I think that's a good illustration that that isn't part of the proposed MDA, but and there you go. At least it shows good connectivity and disbursement of at least those larger proposed. Again, remembering that there's going to be a lot of the smaller, you know, community pocket parks in here that are all HOA maintained that still provides uses, but again, these larger spaces, there's really unique connectivity, I think, that ties in not only through this development, but into the existing network that's in the city. And again, there's, you know, we had a comment tonight about talking about, again, programmable space, that need in the city, and that one was specific, obviously, to the rugby team. But I think, again, this provides a lot of opportunity of that collaboration and planning as we look forward and how to maximize those park spaces and how to get the most out of them, and working with Wendy and her team. And again, breaking up those amenities, recognizing that, okay, it was saying 3 amenities, so we were going to get a, you know, potentially, based on that language, we could have gotten a barbecue, a drinking fountain, and a bench. And it would have met what that original language is. But again, through that discussion process and that collaborative process, I think we've refined to come up with, in most cases, something much better. Doesn't mean it's perfect as it sits today, but it's certainly a great starting point. So, thank you for that, Mayor. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. I value diverse and robust conversation.
If I can, I think there's one other question that came up. Councilman just pointed something out. I think it's a good question for us to discuss is, on the Parks Master Plan and Open Space Plan, down in the bottom left-hand corner, you see a large regional park there indicated. Yeah, right there. However, on the Exhibit B that shows the land use plan, that is indicated as the highest density red land. Perhaps, Ryan, you could speak to what the situation is there and why those two things aren't necessarily harmonious with each other.
Wendy Thomas, that's why.
It's
Wendy Thomas, that's why.
Not a Wendy thing. No. So if you're exactly right. That's done intentionally. So this again is denoting intent of open space, but not necessarily, these aren't defined legal descriptions. It's not saying in this exact location, this is what's going to be here. If you go to the other planning, you'll see red. What we envisioned along there, so my son's on the mountain bike team, on a high school mountain bike team, so I'm super excited about having a racetrack here in the valley, so we don't have to travel all the time. We would love to get like a bike shop down there, some supporting services. So over the weekend, we were up at Snow Basin. 2 weeks ago, we were at Soldier Hollow. So we're sitting there all day. There's nowhere to eat. So I'm driving into Midway or Heber to find food, the red is the area we're allowed to put some of those uses. We aren't exactly sure the configuration that the county's gonna sit on that trailhead. They may come down to the road with some, but they may not need all of it. So we wanted to preserve the ability to put some of those commercial type uses, supporting uses right on the ground with them. That's why it's there. It's also the entrance to the canyon. And so we'd love to get a restaurant up there, whether it's there or up on the, across Harriman Highway. I think it would be really kind of a neat kind of resort area up at the top there. So that's why part of the reason, and then I can't remember who mentioned, I don't know that a road will ever come through Tooele, like a legit road. Maybe they'll asphalt it one day. I don't see. Where's Michael? Maybe he's not here. There's some people may appreciate that. I don't see like a robust retail center up in that location unless something dramatically changed with the road connection to Tooele. But we do see some neat opportunities there at the mouth of the canyon to do some kind of resorty, restaurant type uses. And so that's why that's there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We good?
My sidebar, sorry.
We
yeah.
good, Steve? We good? Sherry, you good?
Yeah.
Clint, you good? Jared, you good? Okay. Last chance before I.
Well, I'm just kidding.
All right, so we will move into the public hearing portion of our meeting. Once again, the public hearing portion of this item. So that the public is aware, there are technically two different public hearings that we will be having here. They both essentially are looking at the same project. The first one is the NDA public hearing. The second one is the proposed annexation, which is the actual land, not the master development agreement. I don't think any of these members of the council are going to be upset if somebody, incorrectly goes to the wrong public hearing on this, because they're essentially the same item. However, it just for record and trying to keep things clear, if you want to speak to the MDA, the first one is probably the better option to speak to. With that, our first comment form that we received is from Martin Ricks. So Mr. Ricks, if you'd like to come up to the podium.
Good evening. I'm not against the annexation of Olympia, but I have profound concerns with both the process and severe weaknesses in the draft MDA. Regarding the process itself, the MDA working group does not include at least one of the two council members whose districts adjoin the proposed annexation. I feel those constituents most affected by the development deserve more direct representation. Further, with the level of public frustration related to past development and with the dramatic size and scope of Olympia, the level of transparency and direct public involvement should be much more than the usual. Well-informed individual citizens or groups should be invited to participate in working group meetings, and the public comment period should be extended until citizens have time to fully review and weigh in on the final draft MDA. Regarding the MDA itself, it is not complete. One glaring omission: there are currently no clear guidelines or milestones in place whereby the developer must complete significant commercial development and/or large-scale amenities before the city will consider approving new phases of residential development. To amend the mistakes of the past developments we've had, we need such guidelines in place. Also, the latest MDA update, as mentioned by Councilman Shields, reflects 100 or 300,000 as the levels of acceptable commercial. And it also notes that hospitals, medical clinics, fire, police, museums, and other public service space can be counted toward that commercial space. That's unacceptable as well. Just for context, a typical Costco is 146,000 square feet. As it stands right now, the developer could build one big store and a couple of dentist's offices and their obligation would be met. That's not worth the annexation of 933 acres. By comparison, Mountain View Village East development will have 150,000 square feet of office space, 60,000 square foot theater, 200,000 square feet of retail. We must put more focus on large-scale viable commercial space before new residential phases are approved. Thank you.
I'm going to have a question about one of those here in a minute for staff in regards to that comment about hospitals. Yeah, I know it's in there. I just want to make sure that I understand it correctly before, so staff can prepare that while we're moving on through the other items. Let's go ahead and do any digital that we have, and then we'll open it up to anybody else that would like to speak, because that was the only comment form I had. So I'll turn it over to the city recorder.
Okay, I've received one comment on this item from Gerald Isaacson. I agree we should annex the Olympia project along with this project. We need more major businesses like department stores, good restaurants, other than so many fast food places. Yes, there are restaurants, but they are all in Riverton or West Jordan. I think they mean South Jordan. These cities are getting all the tax revenue that Harriman should be getting. Bringing businesses to Harriman would help with our property tax forever instead of a one-time shot in the arm like building permits do. We have a lot of residents for multi-living housing. We need major businesses to support our tax base.
Thank you. All right, I believe that was the only digital, so we will open up to any other members of the audience that would like to speak to this item. Please come to the podium. All right, seeing none, I would look for a motion from this body. We have the option to close or continue this to a future meeting. So I'm open to a motion on either one of those items.
Mr. Mayor, I'll just motion that we hold open the public comment on the Olympia Master Development Agreement to a future date.
I'd second that.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Sherry?
Yes.
Clint?
Yes.
Jared?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
And I will vote yes, that motion passes. So there will be another future opportunity at a future meeting to speak to this specific item again. We will move on to item 7.2, which is continued from a previous meeting in regards to a public hearing relating to the proposed annexation of Olympia Land LLC. Jackie.
Well, thanks, Mayor and Council. So this is a continuation from the last meeting. We did receive several public comments. I did incorporate all those into the staff report for you guys to have an additional opportunity to review those. I'm just, see if we have any other additional comments, or if you guys have any questions I can answer, I'd be happy to do that.
Any questions for Jackie?
None.
Not at this time. I do not have, thank you, Jackie, appreciate it. I don't have any written requests at this time. Do we have any digital on this particular item? So would we go ahead, let's go ahead and read those into the record, please.
A comment from David Cottam. Please annex Olympia Hills. It is the best solution for it. The second comment I've received is from Leanne Luke. Please no Olympia Hills. Harriman is not the same place we moved to, and its systems are already overwhelmed. Were it not for the county bulldozing it through, it would not have passed. Harriman never wanted it and doesn't want to be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's anybody in the audience who would like to speak to the annexation, please feel free to come to the podium at this time. All right, seeing none, I'll accept a motion from this body. We have already held this open from a previous meeting, so we can continue it. I do think that we might be getting to the point where we have enough items open and opportunities for individuals to continue to speak that we might be getting overwhelmed. So it might be my recommendation that we close this specific item because there will be continued opportunities for people to speak to this entire process.
If I might, before we make a motion on that, and I would agree with you on that. One of the things that's concerning to me is as these items are having public hearings closing and finishing the deliberation processes, there's approaching a date or a time for decisions to be made on these items. The annexation, the MDA, general plan, zoning amendments, all that kind of stuff, right? I think it would behoove this body and our public's interests to have one meeting that incorporates only Olympia Hills and only the decisions around Olympia Hills. That it's not made as part of another meeting, if that makes sense. I just think it's of significant enough interest in our community that to just make it a part of another meeting seems, I don't know, it doesn't serve it well.
As long as it's on a regular meeting night, I totally agree. We can push everything else off to the next one.
So my question is, or I guess my proposal would be that we set something out a number of weeks ahead so that it can be, I don't know.
I think it would be great to signal to the public in general, this is decision day.
Yeah, this is.
Because the developer has signaled that that's their intention, they want it by a certain date, and it's just fine to tell people that.
Yeah,
and it's fine for us to tell them that this is when we're gonna decide.
Right. So with that meeting coming up on the 29th, that we have the joint meeting, I think that seems like an appropriate time.
Not a regular council meeting.
It's
Well, yeah, it's scheduled.
Scheduled.
Do you know what? If that's the night, I'll have to make arrangements if that's important to me. I mean, again, we have a time frame. I appreciate, again, to Jared's point, I understand him saying a regular scheduled night where we already have a joint meeting scheduled that night. What I don't want to do is, we know what happens when we only hold basically one regular meeting a month. We get so stacked up on everything else like we did in June and July, on everything else on our agenda. I know that we all put in enough time as it is. I don't want to push off all of the items on a regular meeting just for this, but to Steve's point, I do think that just having this item on an agenda is appropriate for this body to signal, as Jared just said, to allow all the time and all the discussion to take place on that. So I would be in favor of doing that. Again, my mind wouldn't be to push off everything else. And since we do have something already scheduled on the 29th, yes, I do have a potential conflict that night, but that's up to me to resolve if I think that is an appropriate night where it's already a scheduled night for the body.
So in the work meeting, Michael mentioned that there might be an issue. I asked what, you said you didn't know, but this apparently is it. Is there, I mean, I totally agree with doing a specific meeting for it, but I mean, having gone through this experience countless times now, to do it on a special meeting might not be the best idea with the public. Is there a specific reason why we wouldn't just do it the next council meeting?
I don't have a compelling
that's
reason
the
one way or
first
the
week.
other.
I don't mind if there is a real reason.
I think that the reason is that it would allow for a meeting held on the 29th or decision made on the 29th would have the opportunity for resolution in this calendar year. If for some reason we pushed off to mid or late October for a decision, it would push off potential resolution of the entire process until January, February of next year.
I'm confused. If we decide on that date, we decide on that date.
It has to do with how the county processes, or not the county, the LG's office processes annexation applications.
So if I could add to that.
By October 31st is what you said.
Right.
So that's October 29th is the deadline, because it's a Friday. The 31st is the statutory date. The 15th would be the date we would have to, and at that drop dead latest, we would have to get the information to the Lieutenant Governor's office. I think the 15th is the day that the regular meeting is scheduled in October.
13th.
The 13th. One of the other items that we've drafted in this development agreement is a provision about what occurs if there is a referendum. And if there's a referendum that occurs, we would know whether or not that would be successful within about a 45-day window. If there's an approval on the development agreement on the 29th, the city and the development team would know before January 1st whether or not there was a resolution to that referendum. A potential referendum.
So it's the concern of a potential referendum.
From getting it done by the 29th.
What is it?
I can't articulate it what I think the concern is, because to me, I don't know that there's a huge issue with the referendum.
Honestly, I don't think the public's paying any attention to this.
I think that's probably a fair classification, but I think that the idea is that they wouldn't want, they'd want everything done before the end of the year. The referendum process, objections, legal challenges, any of that stuff, to have it all done so that none of the off-ramps get closed before
there's a complete resolution.
Before the LG makes the
13th. So the 13th still makes the 45 days, right?
Does that? I don't think so. I don't think that allows.
Not by January 1.
Not by January 1. That's the issue. In all honesty, I think there's, for me, I see two, in all honesty, valid reasons to do it on the 29th. One is being able to get a full and complete resolution. There are definitely members of the public paying attention. We've gotten more comments on this item than we probably have on everything else the entire year. Like, now, I'm not saying that that's a ton, I'm just saying that they're paying more attention than they normally do. All it takes, is my understanding, is just a few people to start a referendum. Now, for that referendum to be successful, that takes, a lot more time, but that process of going from a few people to whatever the requirement is for signatures is my understanding is 45 days. And so we would know before January 1st whether or not we're going to be in that qualified and can have a complete resolution one way or another by January 1st, so there's no looming. And by complete resolution, I mean we'll know for sure whether or not a resolution has been successful or is a referendum.
So that was the little sidebar Jason and I just had. I mean,
is going to vote.
Just calendar days. December's 31, November's 30. There's 61 days just in those 2 months, plus half of October. How in the world are we not meeting 45 days?
I don't know.
So there are additional days that are in that. I don't have those off the top of my head. We worked this out with the developers team, and the days that we came up with, and again, I apologize because I'm not prepared with that information, what the exact
That's okay.
day
If
number
there's
is.
a date, give us the date and the reasons why, so we can tell people.
So
It's as
Bruce,
minuscule.
would you
Okay.
mind speaking specifically to that one thing as to the dates? Okay.
There's a period of 7 days after the enactment to come up and start the process. Then there's approximately 15 or 20, and Jared, I apologize, I don't have the exact number, a 15 or 20-day period for the city to make a determination that it is in fact referable. Then there's a small period for an issuance of the petitions themselves. Then the clock kicks in, and the clock is actually either 45 or 30 days from that, but the long one is the one to use. And then there's an additional period after that of some 20 days, if I remember correctly, for validation of the signatures. It runs somewhere from 95 days, 95 days at the earliest, if things go smoothly, to 105 to 110, depending upon how glitches work.
So that 45 days is a shorthand for a much more complicated process.
Exactly correct. That's all I was trying to say.
I apologize for that confusion, but
Didn't you write that into the MDA that kind of protects some of that? They're not bound by any of this according to the MDA. They walk away anytime they want if there's a referendum started.
that's the off-ramp. There's an
Right.
off-ramp provision for them if
So-
there's an
so I guess-
unresolved referendum by January 1.
So I guess I'm confused
I
by
think
that.
I think one of the efforts there is to give that an opportunity to play out and not force a hand on an off-ramp until
All options are
all
exhausted.
options have been exhausted.
I agree.
That's what I see is they want to wait to see if that signature process goes through, and they want to know whether or not it's been validated and it is referred, versus having to make that decision 3 days before that decision comes out because it took a little bit longer than expected. So by moving it to September 29th, that guarantees that even at worst case scenario, if the worst dates on everything pan out, they will still know by January 1st, and they can remove that before the actual annexation occurs on January 1st. So that's my understanding.
That's good to understand that that's the concern and that's the timeframe I'm looking at. My concern as a council member, decision maker, trying to work with public, answer questions of what's in this and what isn't, that's 3 weeks from today. And that's the only meeting we'll have?
No, we have a meeting in between.
No, on this.
It would still be on the next agenda as
Right?
well.
I mean, that's,
It's just the
my
decision,
only concern is, again, experience speaking here as a community organizer on the council with these MDAs. We've made tons of mistakes because we've rushed. I just, 3 weeks to try to get all of this right. I mean, I've got so many things underlined. Like, if we can make it, great. But man, I hate to pick a date like that and miss some major things. So that's my major concern with only 3 weeks' time.
A couple.
Even if we even if we were able to push it out even one more week to the 6th, to be 4 weeks, I might be a little more comfortable with that. I mean, for public process, it's hard for the public to keep up on all this stuff, so having the date set's good, preferably on a regularly scheduled night. Understand the reason why that might not work in this case, but man, that's not very long for this. And some of us have only had 2 days to review this at this point, right? We've got no report from the committee that has worked on this the last couple of weeks. Like, this is the first time we've gotten any of this.
I got the.
It's in the packet.
I got the full.
That's what I mean.
that to me
We've
is
only
the-
had this for a couple of days. It was in the packet. It was published on
Thursday?
Friday.
Last
on
Thursday,
Thursday?
Right?
Well,
was last Thursday.
Thursday night, so.
So man,
we
it's,
had an opportunity
that, for those of us that haven't been as involved, haven't been allowed to be involved, that's a bit of a stretch.
A couple comments here quickly. I don't disagree with what you said, Jared. No matter, I think, what the time frame is, there's a lot to consider. Absolutely, there's a lot to consider. And I guess if there was an expectation, I guess, knowing that we had notes being taken, if there was an expectation for, I guess, some type of a report from
It's in our
Stephen.
council policy.
Stephen, but this is the first time that we've actually met together since those meetings have been held. So again, in my understanding, or at least my thought process going into it is that the MDA was the report from that. I mean, that's what we did, is we hashed through, we came up with language for consideration. And so again, I'll apologize if I didn't provide something that there was an expectation, but I didn't know that there was that expectation there either to do something interim. But that being said, I think we've been in this process for a number of months. We've done, Steve has said this before, we've been, I think, more transparent in this process than we've ever been in terms of, the way we've approached it, the work groups, the minutes that came from those, publishing all of those. I think we've done a very good job of being transparent in the process and providing as much information as we possibly can. And having started this process several months ago with at least I would say a desire of the applicant, again, to meet a potential approval by the October deadline, and now with these other factors, I think in good faith on both sides, I think we would all like to know by January 1st whether there's any outstanding issues or not. That's been, again, the request, the desire from them to have this done by October, so there could be a January 1st effective date. I don't think that there would be any advantages to us not having that answer by January 1st. So whatever that timing is, again, we have a work meeting scheduled on the 29th. Jared, you mentioned, that you didn't feel like scheduling a special work or council meeting just for this item.
I'm desperate to get just a little bit of time to put work into it.
No, I understand. I'll just say that I think that this body scheduling a special city council meeting just for this item signifies that there's a real desire for us to just focus on this. So I guess a little bit, you can interpret that however, but again, I think that utilizing that night that we're already scheduled, it meets, again, some of the intents of these timelines. I would be supportive of looking at doing this on the 29th.
We just changed it to the 15th.
What's that?
It's not scheduled. We just changed it to the 15th.
We didn't change the combined work meeting to the 15th.
Yeah.
No, we didn't.
13th? I don't know. I guess my comment would simply be, I understand the concerns there. What's the very drop dead date? Is it September 29th? It's the last day? Or what's the last day that?
So not taking into account any referendum discussion, October 15th.
Taking into account referendum discussion, what would be the last date?
Again, Bruce and I have talked about that. That 2 weeks does make a difference. And I think what I'd like to do, if the council's okay with this, is draft a memorandum that highlights those exact dates and send that to you. I can send that to you by the end of the week.
My concern is not, it's certainly for the public consumption, but for my own consumption, I don't want to make mistakes in this. And
this isn't our full-time job.
And I guess also, it's not just the MDA, but there's some things in the design standards that I was concerned about. So there's a lot of documents to go through, and a lot of things to vet, and you don't just read them one time. There's several times that have to be read through, and I haven't been, like, quite frankly, some of the notes from from the meeting I read from the Thursday meeting, it's like, okay, those highlighted things, more concerns to me, right? So those are really advantageous, those types of things, than just my first read of the MDA. But again, then that's several more pages of information to read and digest and cross-check. So that's my only concern, is just push it out as long as possible, not so that we can
So just to
make a
make
mess
sure,
of them, but just so that I have enough time to really feel like I've vetted it myself.
so I need to, from a procedural standpoint, I believe we are still technically in the middle of a public hearing, and it would be not within the proper protocol to make a decision on a meeting outside of the fact that we have not yet closed the public hearing on 7.2. Am I correct? Is that where we're at right now?
You are correct.
So I think this is a valid discussion, and I think we need to finish it, but I would like to continue one or the two on that
If
first.
there's no objections or procedural options, that we could continue the discussion on item 7.2's topic without having the public comment still remaining open. If that's not in conflict, then I would.
We can always add an agenda item in regards to this. We don't have to have a public hearing continue to be open.
To your point, Steve, I think that the discussion moving forward, honestly, I think centers around the MDA and the design guidelines and those things. But obviously, that ties back to the annexation itself. But in terms of that particular item that's open, I think the discussion moving forward, at least from what I'm hearing, is focused on the MDA.
Just because they're so linked is the problem. That's the only reason I'd be hesitant to close the public hearing on the annexation, just because they're linked.
I'm fine either way. It was a suggestion because I think that we're going to get to a point
Understood.
where we have 3 or 4 different public hearings all open at the same time, and that becomes maybe a little bit overwhelming. And so something that we don't really, I don't foresee the annexation. These are linked. We know that. I would be comfortable if somebody really wanted to make specific comment on that, allowing them to do it either in the public comment section or on an item opening up public comment for a specific, if that was really something that somebody had very strong desire to speak specifically to. But as far as being efficient and helpful and making sure that we are staying on track, I think it would be best to close that one item just so that we can be careful with how many we have open at the same time for essentially the same thing.
Again, kind of from experience, we typically have, former councils, we've decided to keep all those things open so we don't confuse the public. We totally understand wanting to cross some things off the list.
It's fine either way. I'm just looking for a motion at this point.
My comment is, look, if you guys decide to do that with this specific thing, we're not making a decision on it. It's just the public hearing on it. I don't know that I can cry too much about it, but I will say, just as a matter of principle, it sends kind of mixed messages to the public.
I'm just going to make a motion to continue the public hearing, just inconsistent with the one prior.
I don't have any objections. I would second it.
All right, I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That motion has been passed, and that is going to be continued. All right, back to the discussion that came out of this item, which is a meeting on September 29th. It is my understanding, Steve, you'd like to direct staff to designate that for this purpose.
Here's what my concern about this whole thing is, right? Is, as I said, 2 weeks ago, the whole reason for having those other extra meetings was to try and get this to this point now, right? I think there's still work to be done, right? This is not just, hey, here it is, we're going to make a decision in a couple weeks, right? There's still a lot of work to be done. What I don't want to be playing chicken with anything. I don't want to be playing chicken with the referendum process. I don't want to be playing chicken with the developer's desire to go somewhere else, right? Or have it resolved by January, and whether or not that's a hard stop on their process with our city, right? I don't want to call anybody bluff or play chicken. I'm going to use those terms loosely there. What I do want to do is make sure that I'm doing everything that I can to help facilitate this process within what the requested timeline is. I don't know that it actually can be completed that fast. I don't know. I don't know that we're going to have all the I's dotted and T's crossed. I don't know if we'll have all of these little items that, you know, we've all got laundry lists of things. Like, I went through the design standards. I got highlights and notes, you know. There's a lot of things to finish, right? And I don't know whether or not that's done, you know, us individually scheduling time to meet with the developers team and staff and say, here's my items, meet with Chase to go through some things. I'm supportive of any process that any of us want to go through. If you want to have an extra meeting, I'll make sacrifices to have extra meetings. I'll do whatever we need to do. And if we try all of those things and we fail to get it done on the 29th, or we're not ready to make a decision, we're not ready. But I don't want it to be by default, if that makes sense.
I totally agree with you. I don't want to play chicken with any of those things either. Believe it or not, I'd rather have this in Harriman than not. Just want to have a chance at doing it right. Even under the pressure. So I would suggest, we just spoke in work meeting of changing the 29th to the 15th. I'm telling you, like, this is not my full-time job, and super pressures at home. If we're going to have a special meeting for anything, the general plan has a lot to do with what we decide with this. I'd rather use that meeting for us to have another meeting, because I think that the most productive meeting we've had in regards to Olympia Hills was the special meeting we had to talk about the parameters of the general plan, or of the MDA. Let's use the 15th to talk about the MDA and some of the things that we've all said we have questions on, right? We have our meeting on the 22nd, and that gives us at least twice that we're going to talk about it before the 29th. As a council. If we can do that, then I can maybe be okay with the 29th. If we're only going to have one meeting in between to talk about some of them, and then it's decision day, then that I don't feel as comfortable about that.
So are you suggesting the 15th or to this?
15th,
Just
specifically
MDA discussion.
MDA, regular meeting the 22nd,
and then potentially
decision
the
day on the
29th
29th if we feel like
I
we're
can
good.
support that.
I actually like that plan better.
I can support that.
It sounds like there's enough of a consensus to make that happen. So, does staff need a motion, or is that enough direction that you're
Just
comfortable
wondered
with it?
when we're doing the general plan.
We'll come up with an alternative date for your general plan.
Yeah.
Sorry, not that that's not important, but
Sometime before January 1st.
So
Let's make that deadline too, right?
One of the things I want to make very clear here is that the intent, what we're directing staff, unless I'm mistaken, is that the intent of this body is to make a decision on the 29th, and we are asking staff to make that known to the public. Am I wrong on that?
you want to publish that today or wait until
Wait until
the
Chase
15th?
gives us the thing that
That
says,
time-
here's the drop dead date.
I think we hold it.
I can get that.
I think the sooner we potentially put that
Yeah,
out
the
there,
sooner the
best.
better.
But I think we
When
hold
you
it
say
till
the
about
15th, you're saying
I'll have that
15th
memo to you tomorrow.
of September.
next week.
Well, if we look at that and we get into that meeting on the 15th, then, if we need a few more days and it gives us a few more days, then.
Okay.
I think that's a good.
I just want, that's why I want to make sure that we're clear on what we're trying to have staff do. So let's set up those have staff set up and notice those meetings appropriately. And then we will make ourselves available. Is there a specific time that you guys want to meet for those meetings?
Just a procedural question. Our meeting next week is really just a work meeting, right?
A special work
Just a
meeting.
special work meeting to,
No action items.
no action items, just to sit and discuss, right? Okay, thank you. Appreciate the clarification.
And then on the 22nd, would we have, because I want to follow precedent, right?
I think we need an agenda
Would on
item
the
to talk
22nd,
about.
we have an agenda item
Progress
for all
made.
of those items?
Yeah.
For
From the 15th.
quote-unquote potential action items in our general meeting. And then we would say, as we've done with everything, they're on for action. We want to get public comment. And then a week later, or
Make a
when we have our
decision.
next meeting, then we'll execute an action.
Because the 22nd would be the first opportunity in a general public meeting for anyone to comment on any changes that we've made to the MDA. So yes, I agree.
I'm not saying we need to move that.
If we're agreed
I'm
that the
okay with doing it
decision
all on
is,
the 29th,
the
that's
decision be
okay,
the
but-
29th, but I'm okay with noticing it that way simply because if it says action, then the public is more likely to pay attention, right?
As long as we're all comfortable, yeah.
I agree.
As long as they don't get surprised and, hey, we're just gonna approve it.
Yeah.
I have no intention of approving anything on the 22nd, in all honesty.
Okay.
I would be with you on that.
Okay. Staff have the unclear direction that we've given?
I think we're clear.
Jackie's got that stunned look on her face.
All right.
So we write special meeting on the 15th, regular meeting on the 29th.
That's the.
22nd.
22nd, and then another special meeting on the 29th that would replace our joint meeting.
I'm not getting any sleep
To
this
have,
month.
It's
No,
not
it's going to
anymore.
be an MDA discussion. We will move the general plan discussion.
yeah.
All right. With that, we will move on to item 8, which is our consent agenda.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as written.
One comment, if I might.
A motion has been made. We have to move on, and then you can make a comment. We're in the middle of a motion, so do I have a second to that motion?
Which motion?
On the consent
Consent
agenda.
agenda.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second.
Now you can ask for discussion.
Any discussion on that? Steve?
If I might, regarding number 8.3, the Harriman City pay scale for police officers, which I am completely in support of. One of the comments that we made was whether or not we felt that future budget forecasts made it a sustainable change. That this wasn't something that we were gonna, we talked about there was an excess in that pool right now, right, the HCC fund, that could fund this for at least 3 years, maybe a 4th year. But after that, those funds would dry up and we're not sure what those proposed budgets are going forward. I just want to make sure that we're at least being fiscally responsible in our consideration of this, that it's not just a short-term fix, but this is a long-term commitment to supporting our police officers and at the reasonable pay that we've wanted to establish for them. So does that make sense?
It's a good comment. I'll say, I'm assuming, at least based on my comments about this item last time, that future budgets will reflect an increase in the police budget due to growth, et cetera, and that's going to be used to pay these things first. I don't want,
That's my
this
assumption too,
is
but-
not authorizing just a blanket increase in pay and we're gonna increase taxes
No,
later.
this is a
to pay.
one-time increase to the scale, but it will impact.
But budgetarily, we
yeah.
will have
It's ongoing
increases to
costs.
cover it as it is.
It's ongoing costs.
If I might, again, you are correct. So as this fund and as the city grows and the department grows, there may come a time, if these continue, I had this conversation with the Valley City managers about the way some of these raises came about.
We just simply won't be able to hire as many officers.
Correct. You will, at some point, may have to trade future numbers for positions. And I think that's going to happen
Regardless.
throughout the valley. That was the discussion we all had, is that if it continues this way, there is, in the Salt Lake City MOU with their union, they are guaranteed to make 1% more than everybody else in the valley. That's a contractual obligation Salt Lake has. So when one of the other cities says, well, we want to be above them, it's going to ratchet. So we had this conversation with the managers, so they all know it.
It's going to be a race to the bottom at some point if they don't change this.
Unfortunately, yes. My hope is that they won't do
As
that.
a reminder, I do have a motion and a second on a consent agenda. So if there's no further discussion.
I wanted to make a comment as well, and I appreciate that.
Apologize, procedure.
No,
Yes.
I actually wanted to make a comment on this one too, and that is just simply to say, Jared already hit it, that obviously there's considerations to be made in the budget moving forward, but I think that this is obviously a necessary step right now. One, to demonstrate the importance that we put in our police officers in the job that they do in our community, and that we don't want to lose any of them. There's nothing that could be a worse morale killer than to not feel that support from the city council. to help keep them competitive. So again, necessary step. We have a fantastic police force. We don't want to do anything to jeopardize that. So again, supportive of this. We have to understand the long-term financial implications.
We're going to vote yes. We just,
So in regards to that, I have a motion and a second.
Yep.
Jared,
Yes.
Clint,
Yes.
Sherry,
Yes.
Steve.
yes.
I will vote yes. As a reminder to the council, if there is an item on a consent agenda that we would like to have any sort of true discussion on, it would be more appropriate to amend the agenda so that is not part of the consent agenda.
My apologies, I would have done it, but
I'd
Sherry
already
and I
started the
were
mission.
in the hallway right when we covered that. First chance to change the agenda.
I just wanted to make a general statement of support for the action.
And with that being said, our officers absolutely deserve to get paid appropriately, and they are one of the finest resources, as all of our employees are. And then there's the firefighters too. We like them too.
Oh, and then those guys.
And then there's those guys.
All right. 9.1, discussion and consideration of an ordinance amending flag lot regulations with Title 10 of the Harriman City Code. Michael. Michael, do you want a pointer? Most people left at this point.
Okay, thank you again for your willingness to hear the flag lot ordinance amendment. I'm hoping that we've got a proposal that the council feels comfortable with, based on your feedback at the last meeting. I know the council is very familiar with this, but for those members of the public who may be tuning in, I'm just going to briefly go through this presentation that you have seen before. This is an item that we have been working on for some time. Initially, we were looking for some direction, some consensus from the city council. We had a few meetings earlier this year seeking that direction. Eventually, the council directed staff to initiate the planning commission and have them work on this. As you can see, we had a few meetings with the commission as well. And now it's come back for council potential action tonight. We had a work meeting on August 11th. So this is a typical flag lot. When we're talking about a flag lot, it's basically a home behind a home that has frontage on a street. There's some, this commonly happens here in the Utah area, in this valley, where historically we had these long, deep lots that were used for agricultural purposes. We're not the only community who has flag lot regulations. Some communities are more welcoming, some are more limiting. We've talked about how compared to some of our neighbors, we tend to be a little more restrictive currently. Our current ordinance was adopted in 2017, and it was intended to tighten up some of our regulations. There was a feeling at the time, or before this ordinance was adopted, that we were seeing a lot of flag lots, and we were seeing them perhaps in places where we didn't really want to see flag lot development. So it did increase restrictions, and it did, in fact, reduce flag lot development in the city. And we did add a number of new standards, which is why it became more restrictive. We've talked about how there are some reasons either for or against having flag lots or being permissive with flag lot regulations. For is it does slightly improve city revenues for city services through property taxes, does increase the population. Some of our fees that are generated are based on population, and of course, we're now receiving benefits from people who are doing online shopping from their home, and that is an opportunity to collect taxes. It does increase property values through development, which of course we do have an opportunity for some tax collection through that for our community. Flag lots do have a tendency to foster preservation of existing infrastructure, of existing homes. So if a community is interested in trying to preserve that older home, sometimes a flag lot regulation allows for some incremental growth. It creates property value, but it still allows for that old home to stay and be part of the community fabric. And there may be other reasons that this community may identify why flag lots are positive. Now, the negative, or maybe reasons to be against having a broader flag lot regulation, is It does reduce the opportunity or the likelihood that over time, as property becomes ripe for redevelopment, if we have a flag lot ordinance that's fairly effective, and a lot of a lot of property owners do take advantage of it and create flag lots, we may kind of discourage developers buying up and accumulating properties and putting them together and doing a more traditional subdivision, because we basically have kind of interrupted or prevented that by doing flag lot development. It can change the historic use of property, agricultural property. I worked for one community who said, you know, we're looking for ways to try and fight to preserve that agricultural property, and so they actually were not very permissive with the flag lots. It does have some impact potentially on privacy. You're introducing a home, a living space in an area where people historically thought, oh, that's open space, that's a field, that's a horse property or something. And it does have a minor impact on traffic and congestion and whatnot. Again, there may be other reasons. So I'm just going to highlight some of the key issues of what we're being proposed to change in this ordinance that is before you tonight for consideration. One of the current regulations is that a flag lot cannot be part of a subdivision where there are more than 2 lots in a subdivision. This was a subdivision the Planning Commission had recently reviewed. As you can see, this concept had 2 flag lots in it, and it has multiple lots in the subdivision. We told the developer that that was not allowed. The flag lots were removed. But the current draft that is before you could potentially allow more than 1 flag lot in a subdivision, and you could have a larger subdivision that has flag lots in it. So that would be a change. We talked about how the current ordinance requires a 6-foot vinyl fence on all sides. There's no opportunity for the Planning Commission to maybe consider existing fencing that might be present, might be considered to be a better quality or more durable than a fence. Also, if there's issues with maybe mature vegetation or site view distances, we want to make sure that there's an opportunity to make some adjustments as necessary. So the current ordinance before you tonight would allow the Planning Commission to have some ability to make modifications. We're still looking for that privacy. We're still looking to make sure that a flag lot doesn't negatively impact adjacent properties, which is why we had the standard in the first place. We wanted to make sure that the introduction of that home, that developer or that homeowner with the flag lot would then bear kind of the cost of saying, okay, I'm the new neighbor here, I'm going to make sure that I'm creating that buffer or that screening by having this 6-foot fence. So that was the thinking as to why we have that standard right now. Another big issue, and this has probably been the key issue why we haven't seen as many flag lots in the city, is we currently only allow flag lots on local public streets, not including collectors or arterials. Our current ordinance does not specify minor or major, and so that is one of the amendments that is before you, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. This was a topic that we had talked initially with the Planning Commission that did not make it into the draft, the idea of having shared approaches for flag lot development. That is not currently in the draft, but that was something we had talked about with the Planning Commission to make it easier to do flag lot development. This was a project that I know the City Council is familiar with that was part of a rezoning effort last year. So again, the purpose of our amendments that are before you tonight was to clarify the intent and language of the existing city code. There's a number of tweaks. Allow flag lot on a minor collector street with conditions. I mentioned in the staff report, and we talked about this previously, the Planning Commission on a split vote was not in favor of that one condition, and we'll look at that a little bit closer. But if the council's interest is to find ways to slightly broaden the ordinance, this really is the key metric as far as can we possibly allow more flag lots in the city. It's this restriction of not allowing flag lots on collector streets that really has been the main hurdle or the main reason why we've been telling people no on flag lot development. Now, that's not to say we're telling everybody no. We have done some flag lots. But when we're telling an individual no, it's primarily because they're on a collector or an arterial street. Again, the draft proposal does allow for more than one flag lot in a subdivision, allows the Planning Commission to have to make some modifications on the front yard setback. That was something that the council had directed staff last time, is to clarify that that's the planning commission's role to establish where that front yard setback is, if it's different than what is closest to the public street. And then again, allowing the planning commission to modify the fence standards. So here's some of that clarifying language that we talked about. The new language is in red, or the underline and strike through. The original language here said a lot in a residential zone, but clearly we see these in agricultural and residential zones. I imagine that was meant generically residential zones, but just to be technically correct, we're just saying that is agricultural or residential zone. So here is the provision that the Planning Commission did not forward with a positive recommendation to you. Everything else they had recommended approval of. I worked with the engineering department and transportation engineer on what might we do to limit the negative impact of having a flag lot on a minor collector. And these are the standards that were recommended by engineering. Have a minor collector when located at least 50 feet from any street intersection and a minimum of 5 feet from an adjacent driveway. And those standards are consistent or reflective of how do we place driveways on streets right now? Do we have separation requirements? So this would be new. I mean, obviously allowing a flag lot on a minor collector is also new. But in having this standard, this is an additional set of standards that is not in the current ordinance, at least not spelled out in the flag lot provision. We still would not allow it on a major collector or any arterial street. Mayor, you had asked a question just briefly in the work session about how does this compare with the current engineering standards. And so I just quickly reviewed that. We generally don't allow new driveways on collectors, either minor or major, but we do have properties, current properties that do front on these streets. And the ordinance does say, or the engineering standard does say, and this is 4.05.12.3, it says unless approved by the Planning Commission. So the Planning Commission currently does have the authority to consider and permit a driveway on a collector street. Obviously, again, this is where necessary, where we have an existing lot that has a right to develop but is on a collector street. So the Planning Commission does have that authority under engineering standards. Also, we do allow driveway locations basically from an intersection that's a 50-foot offset. So again, that's what's consistent with this regulation right here. And then there is another provision. We do allow access from collector streets, but it's for specifically commercial, industrial, or multifamily. So larger kind of development patterns potentially would have an option to have access from a collector street. So it's not that we don't allow any access, but right now under the engineering standards, it's for those three types of uses. So allowing a flag lot on a minor collector would be an exception. It would be different than what is in that current standard. So the other issues, we've had problems in the past where we've said, okay, your flag lot access has to be 20 feet wide minimum, unless you have this longer driveway over 150 feet. Then it would be widened or required to be widened by the Planning Commission. But in trying to fit everything in, the utilities, the fencing, you can't fit it all in and maintain that 20-foot access. So we're now saying, let's widen that to 25 feet to start with, and then it may be increased even further if recommended by the Planning Commission. That would be for a condition if it's over 150 feet. This was something that the engineering department really supported because we have had problems with just reserving 20 feet only and then putting up that 6-foot fence on both sides. That's been a problem for us. The maximum length of the staff portion, just again clarifying that we're only talking about the staff portion of the flag lot, shall be 220 feet. Just clarifying that we're talking about landscape berms, swales, and fencing in this section. No changes on 6 or 7, 8. This is where we have the just clarifying who has that authority to interpret where the front yard can be standardized or applied. This was saying previously that it would be by staff on a case-by-case basis. Now that's been replaced by the Planning Commission under the council's direction. And I believe this might be, oh, yeah, 14 is the one dealing with the fencing. And that seemed to be something that everybody's been supportive of. This seems to make a lot of sense, just saying, we want to make sure we have fencing, but there are some conditions where this can create a conflict or an undesirable situation. We would prefer to keep that nicer fence that's already there. Why make a resident tear that down and put in a 6-foot vinyl fence potentially? So that was something that was really recommended. You know, there are alternatives, of course. We could maintain the current code, deny the proposal, go back to business as usual. You can consider additional amendments, as we talked about. You know, do you want to prohibit flag lots in previously recorded subdivisions? That was something the Planning Commission had talked about, but ultimately we did not require that in this proposal. Should the city allow flag lot development on minor collector streets subject to compliance with standards recommended by the city engineering department? So that one, you could potentially, of course, make a motion tonight and exclude amendments to standard 1, which would keep our prohibition of flag lots on all collectors and our arterials. So that's an option for you tonight. Again, it was a 3-2 vote. Planning Commission did not recommend amending standard 1. So the materials that are in your packet, it's a motion to approve. It does include the amendments to standard 1. Again, largely based on the feedback we've been receiving as staff from council is we're trying to find a way, is there a way to allow flag lots on a minor collector and do it in a way that's safe and doesn't create some of the negative impacts that we have dealt with in the past? We've tried to address that with the support of the engineering department and looking at existing city standards. So now the ball is in your court.
Sense to me. Can we ask what the reasoning was for them not to want to include that?
I think historically, we know that some of our planning commissioners were on the planning commission when this was amended last time. And the whole intent was to curb flag lot development. And those standards have been effective. And I think there's been some commissioners that have said, we really don't want to go back to having a bunch of flag lots on our agendas. So
to be fair, it was a flag lot every meeting.
Yeah.
Am I wrong on that one, Clarence?
Yeah. No, you're
not.
not.
It was literally one or more flag lots at every single planning commission meeting during that time. So this was not a small deal at the time. We were getting lots and lots of those requests.
So maybe I'm misunderstanding the standard 1. They just didn't want to include that at all, so it's not possible on that type of street.
On a minor collector.
Okay.
we go back to that standard. You can see the
okay with that.
language.
Yeah.
And I actually I like the idea of not allowing it in a previously recorded subdivision, right? Again, maintaining for me, the integrity of that subdivision. I bought into that subdivision, right? And where it does, I've been in that situation where I've owned and the city next door owned a half-acre horse property, and people started to subdivide, and the more of those happen, it's only a matter of time before you lose those rights. Right? And yeah, it happens.
We watched it go down the road.
But the way to control that, I believe, is through zoning. You just don't rezone the property. If it's zoned that way and it's protected under its zoning, then you don't rezone the property.
The problem with that, in my experience, was that's true, but as the majority flipped to the other side, then they changed it.
The city council changed it. Sure, but that's the prerogative
Right,
of the body, unfortunately.
But again, what happened. What about my property rights?
Right.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's imagine you live in a half-acre zone. I have 5 acres, and I decide to do 5 1-acre lots. The zoning allows half acres, but I choose to do 1 acre at the time. Right. There has been some comment from the commission, not a majority, but some commissioners said, once you have cast that lot, once you have said that's my subdivision, freeze it. The challenge is if the zoning says you could actually have a smaller lot, if we were to prohibit that property owner from further subdivision, we would be challenged very quickly.
Well, that's different
Yeah,
than
yeah,
this.
right. So we have tried to discourage this idea of just saying, once you record a subdivision, you're frozen in time.
The problem is what I see, it hasn't been that they make 5 1-acre lots that they want to re-subdivide. The problem is they make 5 very narrow, very skinny, that are just wide enough to meet the minimum width requirement of the property and then of on the frontage road, and now they're trying to put another house behind it because they don't have space to put it behind.
Now, this ordinance, and I don't, Mayor, I apologize, I've never looked at the previous ordinance prior to the 2017 amendment, but our current ordinance would not allow that condition that you just described. This would not allow you to have a frontage that suddenly becomes less than what the city code requires for the lot on the front.
Yes.
Right?
So moving on to item 1, or to standard 1, my biggest issue with standard 1 is we don't allow any new driveways to be built on minor collectors. So why are we going to allow flag lots to be built? Because essentially a flag lot is a driveway. Am I wrong? Is that
And
not
that's
you
what
just
I was
said?
talking about, how we do allow it if approved by the planning commission, because there are some conditions where there is a lot that warrants development, that fronts a collector street, minor or major.
How many of those are
and
residential?
And the planning commission can review that. We also allow them for commercial,
Well, I addressed the
industrial,
reason why we changed that.
and multifamily.
So,
So it's
sorry.
not a flat prohibition of driveways on collector streets.
So,
It's
so
just
that I
we-
understand correctly, sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I want to speak, make an educated decision, so that's why I'm asking questions. My understanding is that we do not allow residential, when was the last time, so let me ask it this way. When was the last time we allowed a residential driveway to be added to a major
Several.
or minor collector?
There's several on my street that have been done within the last year.
When was that approval, though?
Well, they've been
Yeah,
done
there
within the
have
last
been.
year.
Because it was my understanding that we recently changed it to where all subdivisions are
Valhalla.
required to put the driveways to the inside so that it does not face the collector. That was specifically the reason we changed that, because of inline drive. Inline drive is the exact reason why we changed that, because it has been such a problem and those residents don't like the fact that it's.
And 6,000.
And yeah, that they don't like the fact that it's a 35-mile-an-hour road, and but to them, it's their neighborhood, so you should not be able to go over 25. And their kids are playing there. But we had it striped as it was supposed to be striped, and they freaked out. We pulled up the striping. To me, it's the same issue. It's a residential driveway being added on a road that I don't think we intend to add residential driveways to. That's my 2 cents on that specific item.
And I'm not suggesting that position is incorrect, Mayor. I'm just suggesting that if it's the desire of the council to seek ways to broaden the ordinance, this is the one standard that will do it. If
Do it at all,
we
or do
want
it
to
the
maintain the
most?
standard, or the rest of them are cleanups. The rest of them will maybe help us have a better flag lot, or at least clarify how the language is intended to work.
I think
but-
I've made this
yeah.
point several times in this discussion, however long it's been going on. At least for me, the objective is not to broaden the standard, right? I want to allow what we should allow without causing problems, right? So when we put this into place, I think it was my first couple of months, this was like one of the very first things that I did, 6 years ago. It was because of all the problems that we were having with flag lots. So how do you solve the problem? Don't allow them to do it. So we want to make sure that we don't have those problems, and if a flag lot can be done that doesn't give us those problems, then I have no problem with that. Yeah. And part of the problem is on that minor collector. I don't know what 6,000 is considered. With the state of the road, you have to drive so slow out there right now anyway that it probably doesn't matter. But that's been a problem, especially with the high school kids, running down there, is you've got this little driveway sandwiched in between two houses. You're not expecting a car to come out of there, and one does, right? So it's those types of problems that we're trying to fix. Right. But I don't want to unnecessarily tell someone they can't develop in an area where it doesn't create that problem.
And Jared, you recall, we spoke, the Health Council, we talked about this issue earlier this year. You know, what are we trying to avoid or prevent, or what is the problem that we're trying to design around? And that's why we looked at the engineering standards as far as placement of driveways, separation of driveways, you know, even on collector streets, what might work, you know, according to our engineering standards. Another thing to be considering or to consider is on a flag lot, when you're exiting that property, you're typically driving forward, you're not backing. We tend to have more of a problem on these streets when you're backing out into traffic and trying to exit your home. So a flag lot, you're actually at least egressing in a forward direction, which does improve that line of sight.
I'll just a quick comment here. Having obviously been on the planning commission when all of these were the issue, which prompted the change by the council at the time. For me, I still really struggle with, again, I understand we're only talking the minor collector here, and again, don't want to unnecessarily limit development possibilities, but I do have a real hard time with adding this one back in here just because, again, of the experiences and the issues that we saw before of these issues. And if you'll go to this is not a significant issue, and I don't know why I didn't catch it before, but go to the second page of your standards. Nope.
Next one, right?
Nope, right there. Go back.
Sorry.
I think again, this is not a big deal, but you have on the last line of item number 2, you know, recommended by the city engineer and fire marshal. And then in item 3, you have upon recommendation of UFA. We probably just ought to have consistency of language between those two.
Yes. Perfect. Yes, that is something.
And I've read that 100 times, and until you flip through the slides, I didn't even see it. But again, I think standardization
It didn't catch me.
of language there is appropriate.
Yeah.
So I'll speak up just because I think I'm the prompter of all this, mostly because these have been several, exactly, issues in my district. Several people have reached out dealing with this in my district. So I'm supportive of it being on a minor collector. I completely understand the concerns, but I think that's why it's been mitigated with the 50 feet from the street, the minimum 5 feet from any adjacent driveway. And I just believe that is not going to throw a bunch of extra traffic on the road. You do allow these on minor collectors. If it's an apartment building, you could do it. So I don't know why we wouldn't do it if it's a single family resident, but we would do it if it was a business or an apartment. So it doesn't make any sense to me to deny that when we do allow that in our city. And I know full well that we continue to allow them on minor collectors because there was a house built that just was completed within the last 6 months down the street from me on 7300 West, that their driveway backs onto 7300 West. So it continues to happen, and so I don't know why we wouldn't allow. And I do believe that I too was part of those conversations, sitting on the sidelines of why we wanted to stop these, because I agree. I don't want everybody with 1 acre to come in and chop them up in half acres. That's what's happening. But the way we control that is through a zoning ordinance, and they don't get to apply for a flag lot if their zone doesn't meet it. So they'd have to come before us with a zoning ordinance, and we simply say no. And it's always the prerogative of the newly elected people or different bodies here to change that. It could be apartment complexes in our residential zone or in our agricultural zones if this body at some point decided that. So anyway, I'm supportive of it, leaving it the way it is and the way it's been written up.
Got any thoughts, Steve?
I don't want to have any discussion on this.
Because I think staff is looking for direction for them to come back with. Are you looking for?
It's on for action. There's a draft ordinance before you tonight.
So I'll make a motion to approve ordinance number 2021-23, amending Title 10 of the Harriman City Code to modify regulations pertaining to flag lot development as it's written.
Sherry, would you mind at least amending your motion just to have consistent language?
Oh, yes.
On 2 and 3.
To add consistent language where to 2 and 3 regards to the fire fire authority or fire marshal.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Steve?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Clint?
No.
Jared?
No.
And how about, no, that motion fails. We're still, I'm still open for a motion if there's an alternate motion. that
Yeah,
somebody would
so,
like to make.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve ordinance number 2021-23, amending Title 10 of the Harriman City Code to modify regulations pertaining to flag lot development, with the exception of Standard 1, and then having consistent language for our fire approvals on item 2 and 3.
I'll second.
Okay, motion is second. Jared?
Yes.
Clint?
Yes.
Sherry?
No.
Steve?
Yes.
I will vote yes, that motion passes.
I would make just a comment on that.
Please.
Just simply, I believe that the purpose of it was to fix the collector issue. That's the whole reason it was before us, so I just believe that was a cleanup. It never accomplished the reason it was here.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments that anybody would like to make on their vote? If not, we will move on to item 9.2, discussion and consideration of an ordinance removing group dwellings as a conditional use from the forestry recreation zone, I cannot talk today. Forestry recreation zone as regulated in the land use table of Harriman City Code Title 10. Michael.
Thank you. This one is much simpler. As the council knows, this was something that was brought to our attention by our Blake, I think you brought this to my attention through some meetings you were having, that there just seemed to be some inconsistency in our code dealing with land use in the FR zones. So we asked the Planning Commission for support to initiate this amendment. We've had a public hearing which received a recommendation for approval, and then we brought it to the City Council for your work meeting August 11th, and it's on for action tonight. So when you look at the purpose statement for the FR Forestry Recreation Zone, you can see, and I've italicized statement number 2, support low-density single-family residential for year-round and seasonal occupancy. So everything in this description, and if you look at the other land uses, it's more about a very low residential development pattern potential in the FR zone. Looked at, here's the table showing you what the unit per acreage is in the different FR zones and the RC Resort Community Zone. Again, very low density. But we had in our table the ability to do dwelling groups. And you can see that it's 2 or more multiple family dwellings located on a lot in one ownership and having any yard or court in common. So a much higher per unit or acre per or unit per acre potential. And we also have identified that in our current recreational zone restriction, it says for new development, new planned development shall be prohibited in the forestry residential zones. And what that means is you can't do clustering. And that, if we did allow for planned development, maybe that makes sense to keep that one land use pattern. But if we're not clustering, we're keeping that really low unit per acre standard down, then it's not consistent to have this use in the land use table.
When did we make that change? Was that what, 2018 that we made that change?
I'm not sure when that change was made, but it was part of that large adoption, at the end of 2017. So here's the proposal before you tonight that received recommendation from the Planning Commission, is that the dwelling group be removed as a conditional use in the FR zone. And that would affect all the different FR zone types that we have in the city. And that's our recommendation. You have the alternative, of course, to deny the proposal or continue the proposal if it's your pleasure tonight.
All right, any discussion by this council? I will accept a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve ordinance number 2021-24, amending Title 10 of the Harriman City Code to remove dwelling groups as a conditional use from the FR Forestry Recreation Zone.
I will second.
A motion and a second. Steve?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Clint?
Yes.
Jared?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes, that motion passes. That brings us to the end of our general meeting agenda. Just so that I get this right, I'm going to be looking for some help from staff to make sure I get the right dates on our meetings. Our next city council special meeting is the
Work meeting.
work meeting is the 15th. Then we have a planning commission meeting on the 16th. City council will be meeting on the 22nd, and then again on the 29th. That 29th is currently scheduled for potential final action on the Olympia development. So that will be a fairly important meeting if things continue the way they've been moving. We do have some things coming up. Harriman Summer Movie Series at Butterfield Park at 9 p.m. on September 10th. As always, on Mondays, we have a Hungry Harriman Food Truck Roundup and the Farmers Market. And then we have that on the 13th as well as the 20th. I will now accept a motion to move into closed session.
I'll make a motion to temporarily recess the city council meeting to convene in closed session for the purpose to discuss pending or reasonable imminent litigation and the purchase, exchange, or lease of real property as provided by Utah Code annotated 52-4-205.
Second.
Motion and second. Jared?
Yes.
Clint?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes, and go Utes.
And I will vote yes. That
That was
motion
inappropriate.
That motion passes. Go Cougars. With that being said, for those who may be watching online or for those in attendance, we will have no further items of business after we come out of closed session. So we will not restart the broadcast as we will have no further action. With that, we are moving into closed session.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Totally uncalled for, Steve.
Steve.